Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku found strength in Shiketsu. If you guys enjoy this movie, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content. And leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story Atlas 713 from AO3. So let's start the video. Izuku walked home. He took his normal route. Not enthused enough to investigate the rumblings of explosions somewhere off in the distance. He had been running into explosions for a long time. Maybe for once, he'll try walking away. Sweat, tears, sewage, and a speckling of blood painted his frame. All Might's blood specifically. The few loose drops the man had been unable to hide behind his mouth had dotted his uniform. He seemed to hide a lot behind his mouth, behind his frame, his company, his charities, his power. Izuku wished he could be disappointed, devastated. Even just crying would be fine. But all Izuku felt was exhaustion. Once he had heard his idol's words, it was as if the last bastion of his body's defense had been destroyed. And where once hopes, dreams, aspirations, determination, and belief in the world and in himself had been, all that remained was exhaustion. The exhaustion pulled at Izuku's eyes with weights heavier than he could hold. It felt like his full body was pulled down solely by that sheer weight his eyelids had on them. It felt like he was stuck in glue. Walking each step felt tremendous. Each thought took twice as long as it should have to produce itself, having to fish out from the deep trenches of the fog overtaking him. He pulled the door to his home open, flicking the lights on. A note and an allowance were on the kitchen counter. Looks like mom's working late again. Izuku walked forward, not even glancing at the left items as he walked to his room. His footsteps a war drum on slow-mo. The steady rhythm was interrupted as his leg clipped his couch and he couldn't find the energy to keep himself from falling. His hands covering his head out of instinct, and slamming into the kitchen floor. The pain was a temporary fix to his exhaustion, but only lasted a second before the weights returned, before the fog clouding his thoughts seeped back in. He stayed on the floor as still as a corpse as he looked deeply into the hardwood. His body was a battleground, one fighting a war he had already lost. His muscles had been the first victims, the energy from them sapped and disposed of, each movement pathetic and slow. His body defeated, the fight moved to his mind. Emotions first. He felt their battle cries and death rattles as he had moved through the day. Those feelings of devastation and rage he had wished to feel charged him in a ceaseless wave of turmoil. He let out a small cough, the emotions battering well past his mind and somehow into his mouth, into his eyes. He hadn't started crying a few hours ago, but the experience he was having was enough to push him past the point. He didn't really know how long it lasted, but eventually his emotions too lost to the onslaught of exhaustion. All that remained was the cool sensation the wood gave him. He was left with one final stronghold in his battle. His mind, already infected and swelling with fog, his consciousness proved a pathetic final stronghold. And his eyes closed, body cooled from the surface of the wood floor, providing him enough comfort to sleep. He woke shortly after, an immense pain in his back, punishment for losing his battle before reaching his bed. He shifted to his back, facing the still-lit kitchen ceiling. He reaches a hand up towards the light. He held it there for a few moments, before letting it fall. It's still dark out. Izuku raises himself to his feet. He leaves his home, hitting the lights on his way out. He wondered the paths he was familiar with, and then several he wasn't. He wasn't sure how, but he found himself at the building All Might had left him on. Looking up revealed it to be a random skyscraper, one of the nondescript ones that held nothing but offices upon offices of an amalgamation of different businesses. Getting back to that spot where he had been left would be difficult, so he climbed up a nearby building. Not a skyscraper, more likely an apartment complex. He clambered easily up the fire escape, a technique taught those several high-speed chases from bullies outside of school. He stood on the lip of the building, the moon at its crescendo in the sky. That same sky lit by a symphony of lights and colors, of buildings, of streetlights, of stars, and of the moon itself. Within the symphony of the night, Izuku felt as if the moonbeams were a spotlight, one beaming down on him. He shifted his expression, looking at the now insurmountable skyscraper he had been left on, that he himself had walked away from. Then Izuku looked down, to the street several stories below him, enough to kill if he made sure to angle it head first. He looked up at the night sky once more. He spoke softly to himself. Is life worth living? He received no reply. The symphony of the night too embroiled in its performance to acknowledge him. Death was a topic to which emotions dominated so strongly nothing could be left for logic, an idea so internally taboo that the common man is allowed to glace occasionally at the void, before his many safety nets drag him back up. Izuku looked into the void. For the first time, something looked back. It wasn't eyes, instead one of the many emotions he had thought to have been killed. His core was filled with an ache, a desire, of release, of freedom, of something besides the endless torment of life. His thoughts were interrupted by a beam of the moon, shining and illuminating the dark alley below him. He looked up once more to the celestial body. He smiled slightly. Logic and rationality was all that his brain afforded him. I won't be able to get a job. Not if this is what high school's like. The military might take me. I could never advance through the ranks though. I have no future. But despite that, he couldn't take that step. It was wrong. Something greater than him was out there, he imagined. The observer to his one-man show. A trial, he said after several minutes. I'm putting the world on trial. I've been through enough trials. Your turn. He looked up to the night sky. First defendant, God. He thought for several minutes. Cool wind breezes his hair to his side. God gave us the pieces, but we did things with them. Perverted gifts into social statuses. He chuckled. I suppose I could charge you with not giving me a quirk. But I don't hate lacking one, just how I'm treated for it. He kept his eyes on the moon. Innocent. Izuku looked to the building he had been left on shortly before this trial, monologue, collapse, breakdown, whatever he wanted to call it. All might. He looked back to the moon. What charges can I even lay against him? Being human, not being immortal, breaking a dumb kid's dream. That'd be unfair. He paused to think once again. A false idol, a Christian concept of worshipping something besides the true God. While I may not believe in the Christian God, all might is no symbol. He's not immortal, and pretending he is has been a sin for everyone. Izuku pantomimed swinging a gavel, swaying slightly with the motion. Guilty. Finally, he looked to the mosaic of skyscrapers and bright lights in front of him. Society as a whole. He started laughing despite his precarious balance on the ledge. It started as a giggle, but quickly evolved into wheezing laughter that stole the breath from his lungs. He never stopped looking at the ground the whole time. His laugh was cut off by a sharp intake of air. Corruption, betrayal, false idolatry, discrimination, abuse. It'd be easier to list what crimes society hasn't committed to me. He could feel the fog infecting his mind once more. He needed to head home. He pantomimed the gavel once more. Guilty. He looked up once more to the night sky. What could he do? To a life that wasn't worth it. To a guilty society. To a guilty idol. Dying was meaningless. He took a deep breath. What kind of world do I even want to live in? The answer came in an instant. It had never changed, not as long as he had lived. A world where I can be a hero. He stepped off the ledge onto the land. I'll try to live in that world. He began his descent down the building, still muttering to himself. I don't think I could live in a different one. He started walking back to his house, briefly considering collapsing on the street instead, before passing it up. Izuku was sitting at his desk researching on his laptop. Becoming a hero in a guilty world meant one of two things: a hero of his own metric, or a hero of society's metric. He used to think he'd be satisfied so long as he fulfilled his own metric of heroism. However, to Izuku, now the world was different. It was no longer about helping the people who had scorned him. It was about creating his ideal world. So he had to become a hero by society's metric. That meant either getting a hero to accept him as a sidekick and go through the channels when he was an adult, or going to a hero school and obtaining a hero license through graduation. The first method required a hero to look past their prejudices to accept him, which had historically turned out poorly, or he could go through a school, one that had strict guidelines he could manipulate to ensure he didn't get expelled. 𝐬𝐻 was, unfortunately, out in that regard. The teachers' freedom to teach according to their own policies was well known. One quirkus teacher and he would be out. Trial concluded in moments. It was a tempting thought for Izuku to end the trial in himself, but it wouldn't exactly be a fair trial if he didn't give it his best, something that was getting harder and harder to do. Even the sports festival, which was considered an equalizer, would be decided on through public opinion and through the school board, looking at schools that accept quirkless students at all. The last remaining one in all of Japan was Shiketsu High. Its exam was similarly unknown as UA's was. However, while UA was known for producing daylight heroes, many of the underground heroes of legends were from Shiketsu. It was known for not caring about the flash of a quirk, but instead for its raw utility. Its school board also wasn't as in control as UA's was, and the school dictated most of its actions around a strict rulebook. The book is available online and has clearly outlined reasons for expulsion. 1. Insubordination, which means refusal to comply with reasonable school board policies. Building rules, regulations, orders, or instructions in a single instance. 2. Habitual disobedience, which means refusal to comply with reasonable school board or building rules, regulations, policies, orders, or instructions on 3 or more separate occasions. While teachers could likely manipulate the rules to make him appear in violation of the rules, Izuku would be able to appeal so long as he carefully documented his actions with support from others. Izuku cracked his neck while sitting at his desk. The exam for Shiketsu was in a few months. He had to ensure he was capable. The trial wouldn't matter if he was too weak to do anything. He had to ensure some aspect of himself was worth more than a quirk. In terms of strengths and weaknesses, his intelligence was one of few aspects which he could reasonably call above average. Honing it until it was worth something would be essential. For someone going into heroism, that meant quirk analysis. What he currently lacked was the capability to understand whether he was right or wrong, as well as the quality of his analysis. His fingers drummed against his keyboard. How to analyze quirks, verify his analysis was correct, and also understand its quality. His eyes caught on the camera on his laptop. There was one way. The video opened on a hand, which slowly removed itself from obscuring the camera. It revealed a figure in a cloth face mask, a bright white moon being the only spot of light on its otherwise encompassing darkness. The figure also wore a black hoodie, the hood covering his head, concealing his hair. The figure spoke. "Is it on this time?" He looked into the camera, his face getting shown closer. Dark circles covered his eyes and he almost looked bored as he pulled away from it. "All right, take 2. Hero Analysis for the Future. Episode 1, the classic, All Might." Editing sounded like a chore, so Izuku didn't. The videos worked as a way to continue honing his analysis, and even if it was received with nothing but criticism, that would at least give him some idea of what he was doing wrong. Other than doing those, Izuku took up computer coding. There were classes online for it and he found it to have a certain draw. It was fun. It felt like making something out of nothing. Hacking could have some application of the future, though he'd need a significant quantity of time before he could actually do anything useful. 2 or 3 classes doesn't suddenly allow someone to hack into anything they saw after all. There was, however, one aspect of heroism he had been putting off working on. The one he was the worst at naturally. Fighting. It's undeniable that fighting and heroism were intertwined. It wouldn't be an outlandish claim to say it was even the main point of heroes. So Izuku researched. He leaned over a computer while shoveling cup noodles into his mouth. He scanned over web pages as he researched different heroes. The main thing he was looking for was heroes winning despite having ineffective quirks for their opponents. He found several results. The main conclusion he was led to from them was a weapon. Eraserhead utilized his capture tape in every fight. Midnight relied on her whip for female opponents. Otherwise, the heroes would be the bulkier types, like 𝗫𝗫, who managed to simply overpower any flame-retardant individuals. Given that he lacked such a frame, the best answer was to utilize some kind of weapon. Making one was way out of his wheelhouse. He was no engineer. Ordering one would be super illegal. So until he got into Shiketsu, wouldn't be able to train. He let out a sigh at that. The next best thing he could do was train his body. He didn't really have any sort of equipment, nor the money to buy any. But there were lots of people talking about recycling equipment. Hatsumeme was humming to herself as she rummaged through an ancient computer, picking apart its circuitry and placing the useful part in a shopping cart. She hit a high note as she started wheeling herself back to her house. As she was moving, her cart's wheel hit a buried piece of metal which caused her to trip. Her cart was taken with her, as she fell over, face planting into the sand. She picked herself up without a second thought and started picking up her equipment. Her attention shifted as she heard someone talking. You all right there?" A very green boy was looking at her. He was wearing a tank top and had a hand towel around his shoulders. May's habit of zooming in on people's faces let her see he had rather dark circles around his eyes. "Of course, all my parts were ziplocked specifically in case this happened." The boy leaned down next to her and started picking things up with her. She hadn't been planning on gathering anything else. But if another pair of hands was just going to offer itself to her. "Oh, helping me out. Here, take this." She handed the boy a microwave shell. "What on earth do you need this for?" She laughed at him. "The right question is what you need that for. And the answer is more parts." The boy looked tired but didn't seem to argue as she started carting him and her cart around the beach once more, stripping useful parts from machines. The boy next to her was scrawny and wasn't able to carry too much, but that would be fixed in time. The future CEO of Hatsumi Industry was on the lookout for assistants recently, and one had delivered himself to her so easily. For his part, Izuku went along with the slightly manic girl without issue. It may slightly interfere with his trial, but he didn't have it in him to argue with her. And so he walked around, his microwave bag getting heavier and heavier as time went on. It occurred to him that this wasn't far from his original goal. After his microwave had filled with processors, hunks of raw iron, and motherboards, the girl finally relented, and the two of them walked back to her house. It didn't escape his notice that she was carting probably more than triple his weight, nor did he fail to notice she had significantly bigger arms than he did. Maybe there was something to be gained from this after all. Her house wasn't far, and he found himself being dragged in without complaint. One thing that he had found about himself was that after the moonlight breakdown it had almost gotten harder to talk. Not harder necessary, just that he felt like there was little point in doing so. He idly felt like maybe he should have been saying something, as her parents waved to him cheerily without question and placed food in front of him. Her father was a shorter man who was fiddling with a massive circuit board the same way one would treat a morning newspaper. And her mother a permanently smiling woman who had cooked with several bizarre Rube Goldberg-style contraptions. He accepted the toast that had taken several minutes to even get into the toaster without question. He was then tugged into a garage by May and helped her unpack all the machinery they had gotten. He sifted through the parts, separating the raw iron, complicated machine parts, and scavenged tools into separate piles. He was taken out of his concentration by a few pops and turned to see the girl fiddling with a piece of machinery. His eyes widened slightly as he looked at it. "That's classified as support equipment, isn't it?" The girl didn't turn to look at him as she started taking apart the plates on a metal glove. The girl spoke with clear pride. "Of course, my babies are nothing but the best of the best support equipment." Izuku's eyebrow quirked at the assertion. "Isn't the unlicensed creation of support equipment super illegal?" The girl waved her hand dismissively as she took the piece apart and replaced fried-out parts with scavenged ones. "Legal schmegel. I'll get licensed eventually, so it's all fair game anyway." Izuku almost wished he had applied that mentality to his dream, though it'd probably end with him as a corpse. He saw sparks start to fly and instinctively grabbed May out of the way, pulling her as the glove gave one large bang and fell to the ground, then caught on fire. All right, maybe she'd also be a corpse by taking this kind of approach. May shook him off easily as she ran over to her machine. She spoke with a glint of humor as she performed her autopsy. "Look at you, assistant, already helping me out." Izuku had been effectively kidnapped into May's life with ease. She had picked up assistants in the past, but few had cared to remain, often putting her off with ridiculous excuses like friends or safety concerns. Not Green, or whatever his name was. Every day she went to the beach, he was there too. He was grabbed and tugged along easily. It felt like clockwork. She even started bringing a second shopping cart, both of which she had stolen. They didn't regard her emotions as a primary concern in her life. Inventing came first, second, and third after all. But she couldn't deny the satisfaction she felt at seeing the boy return and being able to work with him once again. Machines functioned in exact ways. Things go wrong because of a specific reason, not ever just because. It was the reason May loved her babies so much. She would get a goal, then achieve it. Her machine wouldn't fight back, and wouldn't help her either. The machine simply did as she instructed, for better or worse. Working with Green was similar. The boy was content to simply trust her at her word, only reacting if something exploded close enough to endanger either of them. She tinkered with her gauntlet, holding out a hand and feeling a wrench handle press into it. "So you want it to work as a capture weapon?" She nodded as she used the equipment to remove one of her nuts, the internals having short-circuited for the 18th time since she started production. Yup, the palm should be able to spit out a rope that would then cut itself off, but the circuit signaling it to open and close shorts itself out every now and again. She examined it closer as she talked. "Mind if I take a look?" Her head did whip to the boy this time, and she removed her goggles so she could examine him closely. "You want to hold my baby?" The boy rubbed the back of his neck. "Just want to see if another perspective will help." She considered it for a moment, before handing him the gauntlet while watching him closely. The boy took it carefully, maneuvering it like it really was a baby so as to not damage it. He looked at the circuit she had been working with, then to where it had been stored. "I think the location might be the problem." He opened the palm, and started to physically move the opening segment to replicate how it would move electronically. When the palm opens, the part goes into the inside, and if it gets pushed enough, he pushed down on the moving piece, and it clearly bumped into where the circuit would be. It had cut the connection short and bumped the wires. It might even be severing them. May took her baby back from him and examined it. He seemed to be right, and she felt rather oblivious for not noticing it before. She turned to Green with a large smile. It was all teeth, similar to a predator bearing its fangs. "Greenie, I think it's about time we advance our relationship to its next stage." The boy blinked at her a few times, before his cheeks took on a bright red shade. He mumbled under his breath, "Thought I didn't get embarrassed anymore." May laughed. "No need to be embarrassed. You've officially been promoted to head assistant." He raised an eyebrow. "I thought as the only assistant I would be a head assistant by default." She laughed again. Her laughs were odd. They were loud and seemed genuinely happy, a far cry from the cruel laughter Izuku had been used to. "Head assistant is a title you have to earn." She grabbed the circuit board and moved with it over to a 3D printer buried in her garage. Izuku jumped up and sat on the tool bench she had been using a second before. "As opposed to a regular assistant, whom you'll kidnap off the side of a beach." Yup. She measured the sides of the board, and set the machine off with only a few alterations to one of a few previous build modules. "What does that make you then?" "I don't really think CEOs typically build things. If I'm not the CEO, I won't have full control of my babies. The idea of being forced to make a baby, or to give it away to someone who wasn't deserving, makes me sick. So the obvious solution is to just run the whole company." The boy laughed at her. "Not much obvious about that. Guess I'm not much better." She hummed idly as she heard him talk. "Oh, if you have plans to run your own company, I'm afraid you've already been recruited." He laughed again. He had hurt his throat with all the crying he had done, making his voice a little deeper as he laughed. Nope, I'm not exactly a leader. I want to be a hero. Her head whipped to him, analyzing him once more. Perfect. With our babies at your disposal, it should be a breeze. It'll also be perfect advertising. We should head to 𝐬𝐬 together. Sorry, can't. She cocked her head to the side. Is it too far away? Izuku felt the words die in his throat, but powered through them anyway. Nah, I'm quirkless. Even if they say they accept quirkless students, they leave everything up to teacher discretion. Expulsions can be handed out like nothing. It wouldn't be hard for a quirkless teacher to immediately remove me. Mei frowned. She spoke in a tone similar to his muttering, low enough that Izuku couldn't hear her. He vaguely heard something about blackmail, but decided not to bother thinking about it. I'll just go to Shiketsu. They've got strict guidelines about that stuff. Mei was uncharacteristically silent as she stared into the rapidly forming case that would protect the wiring. After a few moments of silence, Izuku spoke. I'm so. Any thoughts about me being quirkless? He winced at his own delivery as she turned to him, her expression still deep in thought. Yes, actually. He internally let out a sigh of relief. She was still her usual enthusiastic self. This would probably be something ridiculous before hurtful. She slammed her hand into her palm as an idea struck her. Assistant. Yes, pop quiz. Do you know what the legal definition of support equipment is? Izuku considered the random topic change, but figured she was going somewhere with it. He rubbed the back of his neck while he spoke. Any material or creation that works to amplify, control, or augment a quirk. She gave a large thumbs up. Correct. Next question. What about support weapons, specifically the kind heroes use? He paused for a second, muttering under his breath. I think it was something like, heroes who are licensed to use their quirks are assumed to be competent with weapons even if it's non-quirk related. Therefore the weapons are assumed to be support equipment. She raised 5 fingers up, still grinning as she talked. 50% right. The official ruling when a civilian used Ultra Jet's air cannon to attack a villain was that as an individual licensed to use their quirks. The items on hand are therefore all support equipment, but once removed from their hands, no longer quantify, unless taken by another individual who can offensively use their quirk. The civilian in question had a mutation quirk that allowed them to change eye colors, thus deeming the item in question to be not a support item, and the civilian wasn't charged with illegal usage of a support weapon. Izuku started muttering again, and Hatsume gave him time to find the conclusion on his own. After a second, his eyes widened and he looked at her. Wait, so that means it's legally impossible for me to use support equipment? She cackled at his realization. This is perfect. She grabbed the printed machine covering and affixed it to the circuit board, then tested the shifting, applying pressure to it and confirming that it had stopped shutting down before grabbing Izuku's hand and shoving it into the gauntlet. We'll have to look into what qualifies as just a typical weapon, but with a little bit of finicking, we should be able to get you decked out before either of us are licensed in anything. I am not sure that's a good thing. She grabbed his gloved hand and pulled it into the air, as if declaring him the champion of the garage. Come on, head assistant. This is perfect for both of us. You need an edge. I've seen you try to lift things, vegetable boy. She started chuckling. We both know you aren't winning anything with pure physicality. Ouch, but also fair. More than anything. Izuku was impressed at the speed through which she had arrived at the same conclusion as him, that he had needed a weapon. He clenched his gloved hand as he thought. He did need an edge, and learning more about support gear seemed like it could be important. He looked at the bit of previously exposed circuitry. If he could figure out equipment common weak points and attack them, he might be able to cause equipment failure, which could be fight-changing. All right. A familiar flame ignited in his heart, as for the first time in a long while, he truly felt he could become a hero. He gave Mei a genuine smile, one of the ones his mom said would function as its own light source. Her pupils seemed to react to that, blinking slightly, before she shrugged and extended a hand. Let's shake on it. I'll make you a few super sweet technically legal babies. And in exchange, you secure me a bunch of contracts in the second best hero school in the country, while I take over 𝐬𝐬 personally. Izuku laughed and shook her hand. A live stream was running. A masked figure alone in a dark room, a whiteboard functioning as the focal point of the steam. The figure spoke. He had a deep voice and spoke smoothly. No, listen chat. Hawks has the potential to move up in the rankings. Comparing him to 𝗫𝗫, his quirks, sheer utility and especially its civilian rescue capabilities make it almost incomparable to 𝐬𝐻𝐼𝐼r. The masked man gestured wildly with a marker, pointing to several words written down. He started to speak again to refute something one of the chat members said, before there was a large knock at his window. He gave the chat a 1-second motion, before moving to his window and opening it. He made a grunting noise as the camera showed some kind of white ball smacking into his head. A voice was heard from outside the window. Sorry Veggie-kun. Thought it needed another whack to get you up and moving. He gave a slight wave. That's fine, didn't even hurt honestly. You normally don't swing by. What do you need? A leg was shown entering the window, and the masked figure walked to the camera to push it down so that it was facing the floor and his companion's face wasn't shown. I needed your help making a new invention. Yup, a new baby's cooking in the nursery. Please don't cook any babies. Please, that only happens when I make them to cook things and they explode. This time it's got something to do with our exploitation babies. Are you sure we can't name them something else? As the CEO I get exclusive naming rights. It's exploitation babies or bust. A fond chuckle was heard from the masked man. Sure, you could have just sent a text. Couldn't. My phone exploded. I thought we fixed that. No, wasn't the laser pointer this time. The solar-powered bits blew. We didn't use anything explosive in that. I know. Aren't my babies the best? Regardless, let me finish up the stream and I'll head on over. Stream? Did I never tell you? I stream analysis of different heroes to practice. Never took you as the type. We can use this to advertise. I mean, it's a chat of, 30 people. They'll spread it by word of mouth. It's perfect. The camera showed a figure with overall pants on approaching it from the floor, before its perspective tugged up and showed the crosshairs of a girl's eyes. She cleared her throat. Wonderful people of my assistance stream. Have you ever been in the market for support equipment? Well, in 5 years, Hatsumi Industries should be your #1 pick. The masked figure rolled his eyes, before easily taking a backseat to the new star of his stream. Izuku flexed his arm as he felt the gauntlet on it. I looked admittedly less like a gauntlet now and more just an arm brace. 2 of them, thick and slightly bulky, rested under his sleeves. The nature of their exploitation babies was that whatever it was couldn't be made with obvious intent to harm. That was the main problem with their legal loophole. If Izuku shot someone with a gun, he wouldn't be charged with illegal support gear usage, but he would still be charged for weapon possession. So the workaround to that is to make the gear have either alternative utility or to be strictly defensive. The arm brace was the latter. In terms of appearance, it was unnaturally smooth compared to the typical rigidity of May's inventions and monochromatically silver. It looked almost fused to his skin, as if that was his quirk, but Izuku knew better than anyone that underneath its silvery exterior, sheer chaos laid inside of it. Pandora's gauntlets was the final name for them, because after the amount of time May had spent on them, even she had started losing track of everything shoved in them. In terms of activation, something would happen, at some point, triggered by him or his surroundings. The instructions were vague enough to be entirely pointless. The gauntlets were also equipped with an advanced eye, something he had actually helped with, though very minutely. The eye was self-learning, and would adapt to be better at protecting him. He felt a bit nervous putting all his faith into a robot to protect him, but more so than their skills, Izuku trusted May. To test them out, Izuku needed to be out on the defensive. Izuku took a deep breath in, then out. The 2 of them were at a beach. May and him had carted 2 shopping carts worth of experiments to try on him. Assistant, are you ready? He took another deep breath before nodding. Alrighty, first test. Punches. May stood right in front of him, and with full faith in her invention, launched a punch at him. Izuku, also with full faith in their inventing, didn't block. May socked Izuku in the face hard enough to take him off his feet. He was returned to the ground with a thud after a second. He let out a groan on the sandy beach. He vaguely registered annoyance at the sand, and the dry internal commentary that he was probably going to get a new bruise. As he pulled himself to his feet, aided by May, he spoke, slurring his words slightly as he collected himself. Forgot to turn it on. May clicked a switch on the bottom of the brace and giggled. Sorry about that. She flexed her biceps. I've got a mean right hook, huh? Izuku groaned as he messaged his cheek. Yeah, savage. Okay, take 2. Having already been taught an important lesson about relying on equipment too heavily, Izuku put his hands near his head in the guard position he had learned from the internet. May stepped forward and threw an identical punch. Izuku felt himself brace. But instead of another hit to his face, a silvery arm shot out of Pandora's gauntlets and intercepted her fist, grabbing it and holding it in place. May gave a few experimental tugs to the left and right, up and down, before trying to walk away. Nothing she did granted her purchase from the arm. Izuku then, in a similarly experimentative manner, stepped forward, then back, the arm not impeding his movements. He then walked straight up next to May, circling her. This works great. I have full range of mobility and it doesn't get tangled in itself. Alright, how do I remove it? May laughed. I forgot about that. Izuku just sighed. May slipped the gloves she was wearing off, and the machine clenched the fabric and pulled it back into the machine. Both of them panicked at that, given that they had not predicted it grabbing things, and the glove would undoubtedly end up in the middle of several different working mechanical systems. The whole thing had to be partially disassembled to get her glove back, and May added a simple timer to the metal hand. May wiped the sweat off her face with a hand towel, ignoring the fact that said towel was almost entirely black from engine oil. Izuku idly noted that this machine didn't really even have oil. Alright, baby's good to go. Izuku took the towel from her and put it back on the side of the grocery cart. He spoke with some trepidation as he recalled exactly how many other things they brought. What's next? Assistant was lying face down in the sand as May worked on the machine. She'd normally have gotten him to help her, but given the physical trauma he'd gone through so far, she'd allow it. She gave him a look of minor concern. The boy gave a groan. She considered for a second as she fixed the calibration issue that had caused the machine to shock him. The thought tasted like acid on her tongue, but maybe she should give it a rest for today. Assistant was looking halfway dead and her invention hadn't been much help. May reattached the panel covering the labyrinthian interior of her greatest creation yet. She shot Assistant another look of concern. She's never been the greatest at handling helpers. She had gotten people from her school to work with her on occasion. Some were interested. Sometimes people got too close when she felt like she needed another hand. No one had ever kept getting into her range, walked into what her classmates called the danger zone, and came back later because why would they? What would they get out of it? No one came back except Izuku. Odd as it was, she wanted to keep interacting with him. She felt emotions when she looked at him, emotions besides the desire to innovate, nebulous feelings of affection and fondness, similar to how she felt about any of her babies once they reached the point she didn't want to alter them anymore. It was nice, having a human to associate that strange pride with. She gave him an analytical look over, zooming in on key parts with her quirk. His eye bags hadn't gotten any better since she met him. Not that she was some saint of healthy sleep schedules, but her bags would fade quickly as she rested properly after a late-night inventing spree. Midoriya's had only seemed to deepen as time went on. He was holding his side on the ground. A metal pipe had hit him there when they tested basic weapons. A part of his outfit, a plain shirt with the words casual wear on the front, had been corroded by a chemical they were testing, and his pants were charred from the flame test. All errors causing the hits to actually make it through had been fixed. But the damage had been done. Somewhat abruptly, his form shifted. He pulled himself to his feet with a groan and looked at her, coughing a few times before speaking. What's next? That pride filled her once more. She really had gotten quite the stroke of luck finding him, hadn't she? A laugh escaped her lips before she could stop it, and she was hit with a strong understanding in that moment. Assistant was the same as her. He had something he was genuinely willing to die for, something he would do anything to live doing. She had her babies. He had heroism. She resolves herself in that moment. No matter what, the two of them would achieve their dreams together. No matter how many explosions it took. Izuku showered, getting ash, sand, oil, hydrochloric acid, coconut oil, and a little bit of blood off of him. He considered to himself that perhaps becoming slightly suicidal was a requirement to befriend May. Besides reminding him of his own mortality, the tests had also been incredibly effective. Everything that got through once was patched and fixed so he wouldn't get hurt by it again. He thought more about May as he scrubbed away some persistent sand. He laughed when considering that both of the people he's considered his closest friends have in turn exploded him and punched him. He mused that maybe instead of quirklessness, he just has a very punchable demeanor. Regardless of the physical abuse May put him through, he couldn't find it in him to muster any anger at her. It was different from the hollowness of looking at 𝐀𝐦. It was more like, even when something blew up and he was in the blast zone, it was just more funny than annoying to him. Maybe it had something to do with the suicidal thoughts. Things that hurt him just seemed funny now. Either way, he was too fond of May to hold a grudge. A cynic part of him felt the need to chime in that he had the same opinion on 𝐀𝐦, and that turned out horribly. May was different though, regardless of whatever his subconscious screamed at him. She was similar to him. It took him a while to get it, but her love of engineering, it had the same fanatical, nice self-destructive flavor his hero obsession has. He supposed the only difference was just that a toaster couldn't really crush your dreams. Or maybe the difference was just that she had a quirk. Even with a quirk though, Izuku couldn't think of May mentioning a person besides him she knew, besides mentioning offhandedly that she had once had other assistants, but that they'd run off really easily. It was probably different than his, but she'd probably been bullied in some ways. Chances are they'd have little effect though. Hard to isolate someone who doesn't care. He wondered if she really was as infallible as she came off as. If she really didn't care about the people who probably whispered behind her back. Izuku figured she probably was. Some people are just fundamentally different in some ways, and an insult that would leave Izuku sulking would probably have zero effect on his explosive friend. Izuku smiled, a real friend. It had been a long time since he had one of those. Izuku ate dinner with his mom, a rarity in recent days. He noticed that she was sneaking glances at his face. He cocked his head at her and she jumped slightly, realizing she had been caught. She swallowed slightly before speaking. Izuku. Confused, he replied. Yeah, she was fidgeting as she talked, clearly anxious. What happened to your face, honey? Izuku touched his face and flinched slightly from the bruise that had been left by May's haymaker. Oh, that's what you were worried about. I just got punched. She flinched at the words, and he realizes historically that hadn't meant good times and laughs. And not like, I was a friend. Oh god, that sounds worse. Izuku cringed at his own words. Why had his stuttering habit still not been fully dropped? Sweetie. Breathing. Izuku took a deep breath. I'm calm. What are you trying to say? It was a mistake. I made a friend. A bit of a weird girl, but a genius inventor. We were testing a self-defense device, and I forgot to turn it on. He felt the bruise again, noticing that it probably qualified as a black eye by now. She's also pretty strong. His mom didn't look even slightly reassured. Honey, are you sure she thinks of you as a friend? Izuku thought for a moment. May was wild. He wasn't really sure she had a concept of friendship, but what they had was certainly meaningful to her. Her long string of whining texts whenever he couldn't make it assured him of this, so he just smiled at his mom, another real one. Yeah. She relaxed slightly, seeming to sag into her seat. She fidgeted for a moment. I worry for you. I know I've said that a lot, but especially around the end of school, you were just dead to the world for a while. Izuku rubbed the back of his neck. Yeah, sorry about that. His mother looked pensive. I know I might not know much, but something definitely happened. You started losing sleep, you changed from Yua to wanting to go to Shiketsu. I won't ever force you, but if you ever need to talk about what happened, I am always here for you. Warmth flowed into his chest unbridled as he heard her talk. And though there was an undercurrent of guilt for making her worry, Izuku still couldn't stop that another smile came to his face. Thanks, Mom. Izuku opened his mouth for a moment, then closed it. Telling her would just cause her pain. His mother was such a perfect person. The only thing stopping her from living a fulfilling life was Izuku. The guilt and pain of lying to her and burdening her flow into him once more. Izuku hardened his resolve. If he didn't make it into Shiketsu, he'd stop burdening her. Izuku laid in his bed, staring at the ceiling. His clock told him it was already midnight. He stared at the surface of the ceiling, intercut by the blades of his fan. He knew that if he was going to be at his best for the exams, he needed to have a stable sleep schedule. No matter what he did though, he couldn't seem to do it. He kept feeling things whenever he tried. The one-of-a-kind sensation of flight, or at least jumping from place to place fast enough it may as well be. Of being drowned by water that was alive, of a sweet smell and pops. He sat up, the blanket spilling off his chest. He needed to collect himself. Or just not be here. Izuku slipped out his window and to the top of his apartment complex through the fire escape without any shoes. Still in his pajamas, he sat cross-legged on the roof and looked to the moon once more. He felt himself unwind slightly as he did. It was interesting to him. All his life, people had looked at him as useless, meaningless, something to either pity or hate. But when he looked up, to the sky, the sun, and the moon, he felt equal, not to the celestial bodies, but equal to everyone in the insignificance of comparison to things far beyond him. He wasn't useless when you looked at a global scale. When you look into the universe, an individual's value is so minute and small it would logically be rounded down to nothing. The stars in the sky, the moon hanging above him, it all felt so much more than him. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool air enter his lungs. He was running out of time. The exam will be soon, only about a month from now. Yue's exam would be in about a week. Shiketsu waited to be able to pick up those rejected from Yue, so they had a relatively late exam. Eraserhead landed softly behind the child. Doing his best not to startle them, he made his presence known with an intentionally heavy step. The kid turned to him slowly. Getting a closer look, the kid had deep eye bags, seemed to be in pajamas, was rocking a nasty black eye, and didn't have shoes. Hopefully he had left without them, and hadn't just taken them off. The kid spoke, his voice soft and light, though it sounded airy, like he wasn't fully in the moment. Sorry, I must look like I'm going to jump. God, Eraser was the least qualified person to talk someone down. That was the impression I got. Sorry, I don't plan to, so you can leave if you want. Yeah, right. The black-eyed kid in his pajamas on a roof was totally fine. Eraser spoke, physically unable to soften his voice. It came out gruff. Sure, I'm going to sit down and avoid work here then. The kid chuckled softly. It was a dark thing. The kind of laugh someone makes when they're at the end of their rope. And the situation becomes so gut-wrenching that soon it can't be anything but funny. He'd heard laughs like that too often. He sat down next to the kid. If you aren't going to jump, what are you doing up here? The kid paused, his gaze returning to the moon. Just stargazing. Aizawa looked up as well. He wasn't really the type to care about stars. He looked up into space and saw the same thing as always. A few lights, a few constellations, and of course, the moon. You do this often? No, I've only done this one other time. I was considering jumping that time. He said it easily, as if talking about the weather. Eraser shifted his gaze from the stars to the kid. He was scrawny, though seemed to be putting on some weight. He was also young, couldn't be more than a first year, if he was even out of middle school. He really didn't know what he was supposed to say in these situations. Typically, he'd just wrap active jumpers in his scarf and then drag them to a hospital. What stopped you that time? Maybe bringing it up was a bad choice, but Eraser just wanted more information about the kid before he proceeded. The kid didn't turn his gaze, but his head turned to the side. Honestly, I'm not sure. Logically, it was probably the right decision. Shit. Wrong thing to say. But I got an odd feeling. Maybe it was nothing, some hallucination, some death row of my mind that happened to work. Regardless, I got the feeling there was something I was missing, something I hadn't considered. Something. The kid took a deep breath. So I decided I'd give life another try. And I set a goal, the same one as before really, just with higher stakes now. What's that? I want to be a hero. He looked up trying to choose his next words carefully. UA's exams were in a week. You know, if you're aiming for UA, you'll probably need to sleep better. The kid laughed again. I'm not. That was odd. I thought all you hero wannabes aimed for UA. It wouldn't be a fair trier. The boy finally gave him a glance, shifting out of his seeming trance and rubbing the back of his neck in a sheepish manner. I'm quirkless. That would unfortunately explain a lot. UA's known for giving its teachers and students a significant amount of freedom. It wouldn't be hard for a single quirkless teacher to send me off. Goal finished in an instant. Aizawa considered for a moment. Were he to have a quirkless student, he'd put them through the ringer. Not because of something as stupid as bias, but because they'd be down an advantage. Quirks were just tools, but not having a tool would make working more difficult. He'd push them harder to ensure they'd be able to survive. And that might mean expulsion and forcing them to redeem themselves in the festival. If he did that to this kid, he would kill himself. It made his blood run cold when he thought about it. He spoke after a moment of consideration. So then where are you going? Shiketsu, they're a lot more militaristic, which means stricter rules that even the teachers have to abide by. If I keep a written record of my actions and can support it with other witnesses or hopefully security cameras, then I can keep myself in easily, no matter who's trying to expel me. That was logical. Eraser gave him another look. His biceps and legs had some clear signs of bulking up. He was putting work in, approaching the situation logically, and used careful consideration and analysis to decide his goal. Are you any good in a fight? The kid raised an eyebrow at him, before pointing to the black eye. Point taken. Yeah, sort of the one thing I haven't worked out. Me and May found a legal loophole regarding support equipment, but I obviously still can't just own what's clearly a weapon. So defensively, I've actually got some good capabilities, but that equipment can't be offensive by nature. So, I've got no real way to hurt people, unless YouTube tutorials for throwing basic punches can match up to the other kids' offensive quirks. A legal loophole to use support equipment, identifying the weakness of relying on it. He had seriously underestimated this kid. He gave him another appraising glance. The kid met his eyes and smiled slightly. The loophole thing was all May. She's my only friend. Aizawa had been there before. She's a real genius, you know. The kid had some clear pride for his friend, which was fair. If a teenager can both make and understand the legality of support equipment, they were definitely an intellectual force to be reckoned with. A thought came to his mind. It would mess with what little time he had left for sleep, but the kid was clearly talented. He may be brutalistic in his thinking, but it'd be a waste for such potential to end up outlined in chalk. He saw the kid was making odd expressions now. He seemed fidgety, sneaking glances at his face. Aizawa wasn't the type to be subtle. You want to ask me something? The kid jumped slightly, realizing he had been caught. He rubbed his neck again as he spoke, a nervous fidget Aizawa had picked up on. So I asked this question before. It was what led me to that first roof. Way to raise the stakes, kid. As a pro hero, do you think I can do it? Aizawa looked at the kid, realizing that for one, he had never introduced himself, yet the kid knew he was a pro, and second, that he had to be careful with his words. The kid was already drawing into himself, his eyes looking at nothing at all in front of him while he hugged his knees to his chest. Not as you currently are. Fuck it, delicacy was never his specialty. He handed the kid a card. A dojo not far from here, Tuesdays after they close. Beyond time, I don't teach people with no potential, and tardiness is indicative of several issues. The kid blinked at him in clear disbelief as he took the card. He held it reverentially and tightly, like some long-lost artifact that would turn to dust at any moment. Tears welled in the kid's eyes. Eraser sighed internally. Tuesdays had been his only free days. Aizawa walked into the gym the next Tuesday, and the kid was already there. Eraser himself was 30 minutes early. The kid perked up seeing him. But Eraser would have to be a blind man to not notice the half-a-foot-long extensions on both of his arms. What's with the arm braces? The kid looked at them sheepishly. It's the 𝗵𝗃 self-defense item me and May made. I know things like this typically start without equipment, but you never stated, so I figured it'd be better to bring it in case. Also, the 𝐸 in them records fight data, on or off, so I figured I'd bring them. Eraser looked at them closely. They were a monochromatic silver. The surface looked smooth with the exception of a few ridges which would presumably move aside for things to move out of it. What's it do? Oh boy, this is embarrassing. The kid looked to the side as he spoke. Something will happen, at some point, triggered by me or my surroundings. Eraserhead slowly raised an eyebrow. It's got a lot of devices, and the eye I mentioned is a self-learning one, so I don't really control it. You don't control your own equipment. May's really into automating stuff. Don't worry, I learned my lesson about relying entirely on it for defense really quickly. The boy pointed to his black eye, which was starting to fade. I got this while testing. We both forgot to turn it on and I think I saw God after she hit me. Eraser let a dry chuckle escape his lips. Turn them off, but keep wearing them. I want you to get used to using your body first and foremost. And get used to using it with the assumption you'll use that gear alongside it. The kid gave a slight nod, then flipped a switch on the bottom of the braces. Aizawa thought as the kid did suicides in the dojo. He considered recommending the kid for you, and having him go through the significantly less biased recommendation exam. He dismissed the thought quickly. The kid had already set his sights somewhere else, plus Shiketsu might be better for him. He had mentioned that asking someone if he could be a hero had led to a first breakdown. Chances were it was a hero, which would by extension mean that he'd by default assume that the teachers who are heroes will try to expel him. If he was in UA, especially Aizawa's class, with the constant threat of expulsion hanging over his head, he'd probably have a few more breakdowns or panic attacks over the stress. No, Shiketsu's militaristic and strict adherence to the rules of their handbook would be a comfort to the boy, a security blanket he could grip onto. He yelled out to the flagging kid, "Stop." The kid followed his instructions, and Aizawa threw a water bottle at him, which he caught and drank from. Aizawa cracked his neck as he entered a resting stance in front of the kid, who capped and dropped the bottle before entering a peekaboo boxing guard. Well, at least it wasn't starting from the very beginning. The sparring was simple. Aizawa let the kid try his damnedest to hit him while he dodged out of the way. If the kid ever overcommitted to the offense, he'd tap his fist against the kid's unguarded location. Not enough to hurt, just enough to show that in an actual fight, he'd have been hit. The kid was smart though. He adapted easily and almost never made the same mistake twice. Aizawa reaffirmed his belief. This kid had some amazing potential. He found that something a lot more dangerous than a weak quirk was reliance on a strong one. After all, if someone came by who was a direct counter to your quirk, you have to ensure you can still beat them. It was why Eraser had never lost even to heteromorphic quirks. On the flip side, oftentimes, people with weak quirks divulge so much time and energy into trying to make them useful, they often fail to learn actually useful information, like martial arts, analysis, or logical thinking. This kid was the opposite, obviously. In some ways, the quirklessness was a strength. He wasted no time working on a possible application for hair changing colors, or any other seemingly useless ability. Instead, he had worked with a friend on support equipment tailored to him, studied the best school to go to instead of just laser focusing on the best school in the area. He had at least tried to learn how to fight through the internet, and was clearly trying to analyze Aizawa while they fought. The kid threw a punch, and Eraser grabbed his arm by the brace, placing his other hand on the kid's wrist and throwing the kid over his shoulder. He let out a groan as he hit the floor. Never leave your limb extended after you throw a punch. Leaves you open for grappling. Curiosity had started to get the better of Aizawa. All right, flip the switch on those things on. Let's have you practice with the equipment you'll be using. The kid nodded, turning them on. Just so you're aware, they've been recording your movements, so they sorta already know how you fight. No good hero is a one-trick pony. I'll be fine. The kid nodded and entered his stance once more. Aizawa initiated this time, throwing a light punch in the kid's direction. A metal claw ripped through the air and grabbed his arm, stopping it. The kid moved in perfect sync with it, placing a hand in the same place and launching a fist towards Aizawa's stomach. Aizawa grabbed it and redirected it, tugging on the robot arm enough to jostle the kid forward. He grabbed the kid's collar, but had to retract as another robot arm extended from the other brace. Instead, Aizawa went low and swept the kid's legs. The robot arm stopped the kid from falling, acting like a third hand to guide him to just rolling away from it instead. In the time that it took, the arm on Aizawa's let go of its grip and returned to the kid. Aizawa threw his scarf out this time, centered straight at the boy. Two new appendages met in the middle in front of the boy and unfurled into one complete shield, blocking the scarf. Aizawa redirected his weapon, wrapping it around the shield and trapping the two parts together before grabbing the top part and leaping over it. The kid tried to meet him with a punch, but it was far too telegraphed, and Aizawa pushed it away with his foot as he landed in front of the kid and flicked him in the head. He unwrapped the equipment. Good. You could use a little more training for working with the equipment, but overall the main thing to work on is just base martial ability. It was good. For not having much experience, the kid managed to work in sync pretty well with the equipment. He seemed to use it as a guide for his own defense, instead of a fully autonomous defense system. He really did love teaching kids with potential, even if he was probably going to go gray in his 30 seconds thanks to it. Izuku was exhausted, and yet he'd never felt more alive. Fighting was fun. Working with Pandora was like fighting alongside a partner which was learning to work with him as much as he was learning to work with them. He sent a text to May explaining that he'd been working on Pandora's code and wanted to talk about it. Instead of a text, he received a call. Assistant, how's the baby? Pandora's working great. It's a long story, but I sparred with someone and got to take her for a real test drive. Oh man, I can't believe I missed it. Sorry about that, it worked great though. Oh, you just reminded me. I forgot to tell you at the beach, but if you just wear them around they'll start picking up on your movements and rhythms better. Try wearing them around for a while. Izuku agreed easily, and an explosion called May's attention away from the call. Time passed too quickly for Izuku's taste. He trained with Eraser, worked on Pandora with May, and walked around with the gauntlets on, letting them become accustomed to his natural rhythms. But all too fast, the time was approaching for his first battle. Izuku looked at Shiketsu. When compared to the enormity of UA, it was incredibly subtle. It was a basic school building, with a lot of extra land in the back where a large forest was. The school had a darker color palette and seemed a lot more low-key. Plenty of the students milling about had obvious quirks, and a few looked disappointed to be here, likely the UA failures. Izuku made his way to the gymnasium, which was the size of an industrial warehouse. He lined up next to several other people, carefully analyzing each person he was standing next to. A teacher walked in front of them. The man walked with a perfect marching cadence, facing away from them before he reached the middle of the stage, then making a sharp turn to face them. The man held his hands behind his back and stood with a perfectly straight back. He had dark black hair and wore the teacher's uniform without a single crease. Attention! The man's voice was commanding and stern. He looked at each of the new applicants with an intense gaze. I welcome you all to our school. I understand a great many of you are here as a second choice. However, I would like to let it be known that we are by no means an easy school to enter. If you came here with the belief that UA was hard, so we shall be easy, I would ask you not to waste our time and simply leave. He waited a second, and quite predictably, no one moved. As for the rest of you, I ask you to understand that we adhere to a strict rulebook. On it, several things will result in immediate expulsion. Quirk usage on another student without explicit permission is one of those things. Now then, formalities out of the way. Welcome to your exams. Each of you line up in a single file line. The teaching staff will guide you to individual areas. Izuku and the rest of the students did as they were told and walked forward before being sorted into different locations. Izuku walked into the forest. A teacher he didn't recognize was walking alongside them before stopping at the entrance of the city. She spoke with a big smile on her face. All right, kiddos. This is Exam D. In this forest somewhere are a group of civilians being held hostage, and a villain that will be impeding any rescue attempts. So do your best to rescue the hostages. They believe in you. A few giggles were heard in the crowd as Izuku steeled himself. He waited a second, and the teacher cocked her head in confusion at them. Right, it was like Eraser had always said, no countdowns. One part of him wanted to run off, but he stopped himself and built some courage before yelling out, "Hey everyone," he shouted to get their attention. Chances are, we're supposed to work together on this. A few kids looked from person to person then back to him. So let's make a plan. He pulled out a notebook and looked up. Is anyone here either capable of flight or has confidence in information gathering abilities? A few of the kids muttered to each other before one boy raised his hand. He spoke with volume and a lot of passion. I can't really fly without support equipment, but I can reach significant heights. Izuku nodded, looking at the boy. Fly straight up and see if you can spot any irregularities. Something like an area without trees or smoke. The boy shot straight up without hesitation, a significant quantity of wind following him, causing Izuku to hold his notebook down to stop it from flying off. A few students looked to the female teacher, who still hadn't said anything, and realized the test was already starting. A few left after realizing that, but a large group remained alongside Izuku as the boy who shot up fell back down. He landed softly and pointed deeper into the forest. There was an open area over there. A few students started sprinting off in that direction, leaving even less who were interested in working together. He spoke to the remainder. All right, number one priority for this should be hostage rescue. He pointed to the boy who had shot into the air. Once we all get there, try to redirect the villain somewhere else with a gust of wind. The boy nodded. Anyone else who's more confident in their combat ability, pair up with him and stall the villain. A few other kids, one with small eyes and deep purple hair, and one with a clear alligator mutation, both walked to his side. Izuku faced the remaining 3 students. One was a girl who hadn't said anything. She spoke in a casual manner. This is totes exciting. I can glam things up and confuse people. Izuku nodded, and a boy completely covered in hair looked at him next. He spoke calmly. My hair can be manipulated and extended. I believe we should move forward now if we are to participate. Yes. Izuku ran a quick calculation in his head before nodding. You're right, let's move. The group did so easily, and they heard the sounds of combat, causing Izuku to motion for everyone to crouch down, doing so himself as he walked forward and saw the situation. The fake villain was standing next to a proverbial pile of defeated students. They didn't have a scratch on them and had no obvious mutations. Izuku held up a hand, telling them to wait, and another student charged out of the brush. The teacher's hand then lit up with a blinding light, and when everyone could see again, the student was added to the pile. A group of wooden dummies with the word hostage written on them were tied together in the area the teacher was guarding. He spoke in a hush to them. I should be able to defend without sight. I'll charge in first and try to get him away from the hostages. He looked to the boy who could fly. Once the two of us are far enough, you're confident you won't hit one of them. Send both of us flying. The boy nodded. He turned to the hair-covered student. Take as many with you as you can. The boy nodded. He then turned to the girl. Can you make it look like someone else is charging at the villain in a second? The girl nodded. Izuku then turned to the alligator mutation quirked student and the violet-haired boy. Once the teacher and I get sent flying, chase after us. Chances are I'll lose, and we need to keep them as far away from the hostages as possible. They each nodded, and he turned to the girl. Now, the girl let out a breath, which slowly solidified into a perfect replication of Izuku, who then charged straight out towards the teacher. Izuku closed his eyes and saw the flash of light, then opened them and charged. He saw the teacher slam his fist through the illusion's head, as Izuku's actual form met him afterwards. The teacher raised a fist again, and Pandora, which had also been analyzing the situation, triggered a pitch-black net covering the man's fist, then wrapping around it. A dull light came from it as Izuku responded with a punch to the man's chest, which he blocked with his arm. The teacher kicked out at Izuku, and Pandora shot half a shield out, blocking it at a diagonal angle, forcing the kick to slide off of it and giving Izuku a clear shot, which he used to land a punch to the man's side. The man raised his other fist, and net shot out from the other brace, but the man was ready. He caught the second net with his already covered hand, and a massive light filled Izuku's vision, blinding him even as he closed his eyes. Izuku heard metal and flesh impacting, and started marching forward, relying entirely on Pandora without his vision. 𝐻𝐸's hands were covering his face in a guard, but he never felt an impact as he kept moving, pushing the teacher back more and more, before finally he felt his feet leave the ground. Vision slowly returned as he saw himself careening through the air. Several of Pandora's metal shields and robotic arms were extended. The boy who had a wind quirk flying alongside him and the teacher. He spoke in a loud voice. 𝐻𝐸, your passion shines brightly. Let us engage in a white-hot battle together. The teacher raised a hand again, and while the second net retracted had tried to shoot again, it didn't account for the wind and ended up hitting Izuku in the face, which ironically worked as he didn't see the flash. The net retracted a moment later, and Izuku felt Pandora shoot out multiple spiked arms which impaled the trees nearby and slowed him down as he descended like a metallic spider, gripping tree after tree before finally he was slow enough that they all retracted and he rolled easily, catching himself. The teacher had landed much poorer. Having used the many limbs of trees to slow his fall, he was scratched up and clearly somewhat hurt. He spoke for the first time. Your coordination is impressive. We shall see if it lasts. The flying boy also showed clear signs of a poor landing as he rushed out from the depth of the trees. He had probably gotten blinded by the flash and rendered unable to direct himself. He rushed forward, and a metal sheet covered Izuku's eyes as another flash went off. Izuku charged forward as well, a shield blocking the teacher's hit on the wind student. The large boy started swiping with his hands, and the teacher was sent flying, his body impacting a tree. Izuku jumped back to be behind the boy. After a moment of staring at each other, lumps of flesh speared through the air, and the teacher just barely managed to block both of them by picking up a tree limb and batting them down. The purple-haired boy walked into the clearing, part of his hand gone. Let us put on a dignified showing. Following quickly behind, the alligator mutation student rushed past him and into the fray. The teacher opened his mouth, and a massive bang resounded through the area, bringing each of them to their knees as they were unprepared for the sound-based attack. The alligator quirked boy especially hit the ground, clutching his head. Izuku remembered that alligators supposedly had much better hearing than humans. Izuku heard a ringing in his ears, but unlike the others, brought himself to his feet. Izuku wasn't sure when the exam would end, but he had assumed that they were to treat it like a realistic situation and try their best to defeat the teacher. The teacher stood strong and with a straight back as he looked down on them. Izuku felt something inside him snap. He had been trying his best. He had been fighting his hardest. He had planned and schemed. He trained. He exploited loopholes to be here. Yet, someone was still looking down on him. Someone was always looking down on him. Izuku felt his heart start beating to life, an endless war drum beating and pushing him forward. He couldn't stop as a maniacal laugh came through his lips. He felt truly alive for the first time since All Might had crushed his dreams. He collected himself and stared at the teacher with animalistic eyes. That man was standing in the way of his dream. That man was looking down on him. That man, who in reality was as insignificant as Izuku himself, pretended to be above him. The teacher noticed his shift in personality, and his eyes narrowed. He entered a serious fighting stance, while the rest of Izuku's companions were still on the ground. Izuku ran at the man, his guard fully dropped, relying entirely on Pandora for defense. The man covered his head with his hands clearly on the defensive, and Izuku grabbed the man's hair. A dirty fighting trick Eraserhead had taught him. A flash went off blinding Izuku, but he still had his grip. He launched a punch at the man, feeling his fist connect with something. He heard another thunk as Pandora seemed to block another punch. His arm and fist were a jackhammer digging into the man as he switched to attacking the face, then back to the body as the man failed to remove his grip. Izuku still couldn't see, but Pandora covered his ears with earplugs as another sonic blast resounded in the area, keeping Izuku's companions out of the fight. Izuku's vision returned to him, and he saw the teacher had a bloody nose as they fought. It was nothing like the fights he would see while walking around. There was no honor as he felt his fist start to ache from impacting a hard surface over and over. His death grip on the man's hair was something he'd never from any daylight hero. It registered to him as he forced the man to a knee that he was still smiling maniacally. He wasn't the hero in this fight. He didn't care. He let go of the man's hair and spun with a flourish and kicked him in the head. The man hit the ground. Izuku felt blood on his hands and looked up to the sky. He let out a deep breath, staring straight up. The earplugs removed themselves from his ear, and he started to catch his breath. As he turned, he felt it before he heard another sonic bang thunder through the area. The sound felt almost impaling, as if a sword had skewered him straight through one eardrum and into another. A hand grabbed his leg and pulled, forcing him to the ground as the larger man took advantage of his pain. He felt Pandora activate, but stop, as both of the opening segments were held down by the man. Izuku couldn't cover his head, his hands held down, and he felt the other man's head impact his. He heard the man spit to the side of Izuku. "If it's as brutality you want, I can deliver." The man launched another headbutt into Izuku, the hit staggering him, and a flash activated from the man's hands, blinding Izuku once more. The man was, well, a man, and had significantly more muscle and bulk to work with as he slammed his forehead into Izuku. Izuku felt his legs kick uselessly as he failed to push the man off. The man went for another headbutt, but Izuku twisted his body and sunk his teeth into the man's arm, the pain forcing the man to retract it. He launched a punch to where the man's head would roughly be, forcing the man off of him while Izuku got his vision back. The man still had a grip on his left Pandora gauntlet, and Izuku returned the man's previous gesture, spitting to his side. "Brutality. I just want to win." Izuku charged forward. The man's eyes tracked his movements as Izuku moved, a hand reaching out in a timed strike, causing Pandora to block both of their attacks as a shield moved in front of Izuku's hand as well. Izuku wrapped his hand around the half-shield, and instead of retreating, pushed it forward, slamming the metallic surface into the man's head, keeping his momentum. Izuku launched his other fist into the man's chest. The man opened his mouth, and earplugs cover Izuku once more as another burst resounds through the area. Izuku couldn't tell why but backed up out of instinct, a move proven to be smart as a branch cascades down and falls in front of him. Izuku could feel his body flagging. He had likely put a lot more pressure on the man, but he was naturally less used to the fighting and was significantly younger. The man was still good for another 12 rounds of this. Izuku would be surprised if his lungs would let him go another 5 minutes. He made a mental note to ask Eraserhead to force him to do more cardio once he was out of this. Izuku raised his hands, the teacher doing the same, before a red flare in the sky interrupted their fight. The teacher dropped their guard, and Izuku held his, staring at the man. The man returned the look. He spoke easily. "The exam is over. I don't remember being told what a flare means." The man looked him up and down with an appraising eye. "Very well then. I desire to straighten out that attitude regardless. Let us exchange a few more blows, HM." Izuku coughed out a breath, sucking in air as he laid on the damp forest floor. The teacher stood over him, nose bleeding more heavily now. Several broken limbs of the trees and Pandora lay next to Izuku. Izuku coughed more as he urged his body to move, but found no energy within them. It reminded him of the night that started all of this. He let out a little giggle at the fact he had been laying on wood, and now he was laying in the woods. The teacher was also breathing heavily. The man was using a tree branch that he had used as a weapon to stand. Time was a funny thing, and Izuku had no clue when it had started or ended, and no clue how long the combat had lasted. The teacher coughed a few times. "You rely on your quirk too heavily." At that, Izuku started to laugh uproariously. It was uncontrollable, even with what little air he had left. The teacher spoke in exasperation. "What? Are you going hysterical again?" Izuku's laugh sputtered into coughs. "I don't have a quirk." The teacher raised an eyebrow. And what exactly are those things on your arms? In reality, support gear. Legally, very useful bracelets. The teacher sighed. They're going to be a pain to teach. Izuku creased his brow as he stared into the clouds in the sky. Why are you fucking with me? Language. Don't raise a guy's hopes like that. That's just cruel. There's nothing cruel about it. I'm an experienced underground hero. We were going to grade based on several metrics: individual performance, teamwork, coordination, planning, and various other factors. Izuku turned to look at the man and saw a beaming smile. You performed excellently in all categories. You organized a team, planned out an attack, properly estimated and utilized quirks you had seen only once, and managed to fend off an experienced pro for what's now been around an hour. Izuku was immensely tired, yet could feel tears coming to his eyes. The man continued to speak. Shiketsu will be honored to have you, student. Izuku reached his hand up to the man, the same way he had reached meaninglessly for his kitchen light so many months ago, where he had been met with nothing but a ceaseless ray of light. Solid calloused hands met his and pulled him up until he was standing. The man coughed some himself. You know, the flare meant that all the civilians had been rescued. Returning was optional from there. It wouldn't have been considered a full victory without my defeat. It still isn't. I didn't beat you. The man gave Izuku a pat on his back. Pandora whirled to life but had nothing left to block his friendly gesture with. In a realistic situation, backup would have been provided and I would have been dealt with. Have some pride, young man. You were all never meant to truly beat me. Charging straight and without a plan would be considered a severe detriment to your score. But even with the strength of yourself and your equipment, you organized, planned, and prioritized the civilians. Izuku felt the sun on his sweaty body, its warmth enveloping him. I actually did it. The man laughed. You've passed with flying colors. Izuku covered his eyes with both hands and felt them burn as he couldn't stop his tears from flowing. Flashbang. Former underground hero and current Shiketsu High teacher groaned as he sat into his seat around the different staff members. One of his colleagues, a female member of the staff who went by Crackle, laughed at him. Age getting to you, old man? Flashbang let out a groan. I'm only 43. She waved her hand to the side. You're practically ancient. The principal cleared her throat, which cut the two off from their arguing. She spoke formally and in a dignified manner. Flashbang, it's unlike you to groan in such a way. What is bothering you? The woman was the picture of dignity. She had long black hair and sharp features. Her presence made everyone near her feel as if they were constantly being judged. One of the kids in the exam hurt me a little. Nothing I'm not used to, but I'm going to be sore for a while. Crackle cocked her head to the side before animatedly snapping her fingers. The green one. Flashbang nodded. All the bodycam footage is still there. The kid's eardrums were bleeding after my first bang, but he kept fighting, which speaks to a ridiculous pain tolerance. After a while, his legs gave out, but he used equipment to keep him up for long enough that he could keep fighting. That kid's got some serious issues. Crackle nodded her head. Little dude had some serious eye bags. He gets a 100% from me on the teamwork side of things though. Little man collected a squad, didn't mind others sticking around just to hear Flashy's location. Then organized a plan to prioritize hostage rescue, working with quirks he was told and some he figured out on his own. The principal nodded. He seems like a perfect student. What was his quirk? Crackle spoke at the same time as Flashbang. Some kinda arm braces. He didn't have one. The principal raised an eyebrow, and Crackle cocked her head to the side again. The arm braces were a piece of support equipment. The principal frowned. Support equipment wasn't allowed for this test. It wasn't legally considered support equipment, as the kid was quirkless. He explained it to me after the fight. And I mean, I'm no lawyer, but the logic seems sound. The thing couldn't actually hurt anything with its base abilities, just offend the kid. The principal considered for a moment. I'd like to speak with him. Izuku chewed on a piece of toast in May's garage. It was stuck between his teeth and he chewed while he worked. He had to ignore the soreness of his arms and the pain chewing brought thanks to his broken nose. Pandora's guts were exposed in her workbench, several wires connecting it to a nearby computer. May was looking over the data provided by the AI, whilst Izuku worked on repairing the base parts that had been broken by the examiner. He took the toast out of mouth and swallowed a bite. Izuku spoke while he put on a soldering mask. How's our baby looking? Izuku probably could have fought May more on not calling them babies as well, but it would have been a losing battle, so he didn't bother. May's eyes zoomed in on various parts of a rather massive page of code. She gave a maniacal laugh. We may have lacked some foresight regarding the eye. Izuku raised an eyebrow, but didn't turn to her as he connected two wires together. Elaborate, please. May spun her chair around and rolled away to clear a space so Izuku could see. He was new enough to everything that machine learning was still somewhat beyond him. But he thought he could see the problem at the very least as he gave the code a quick look over. It started to alter its own code. May nodded. I might have been given too much free range. I didn't put many failsafes in there. I mean, it shouldn't be capable of getting too advanced just due to its own technological limits, and since it's not plugged into the internet we don't have to worry about it going all Skynet on us. Izuku considered for a moment. In that case, is this actually a problem? Not particularly. I mean, it's still got the code that prevents it from attacking people, and it shouldn't be capable of removing that, so I think it's fine. I just figured you should know that Pandora's starting to get a bit of a mind of her own. Izuku gave his equipment an affectionate pat. They grow up so fast. Mei laughed, then sighed looking at Izuku. Yeah, they sure do. Izuku felt a blush come to his cheeks as she obviously looked at him while saying that. But if Mei could even feel embarrassment, she wasn't about to show it now, so she just stared harder. Izuku changed the topic instead. Your acceptance letter come yet? Yup. Number 1 in the support exams. Mei held up a gloved thumb and winked at Izuku. How about you? Shiketsu welcome you in yet? Yeah, actually. Apparently they don't care about ranks, just passed or failed, but I was told I had an impressive showing. Which, to be honest, says more about Pandora than me. Mei cackled, spinning her chair around to look at the code once more. While our exploitation baby is the highest quality, it only works so well thanks to its user. Mei typed something out, altering her code slightly. I wouldn't make something of this quality for just anyone. You're a really lucky guy, assistant. I definitely am. Eraserhead gave Izuku a look as he walked into the dojo. You get hit by a truck or something? Izuku just rolled his eyes. Yeah, I think the license said Shiketsu, but I can't be sure. The older man stretched lackadaisically. Forgot about that exam. You think you got in? I already got the letter. That's quick. We are going to keep doing this, right? So long as you have unused potential, I'm going to keep teaching you. Especially if those formal nuts try to make you care about useless things like honor or dignity. Someone needs to be here to teach you the proper form behind a crotch shot. Izuku laughed as he entered his rest stance. Thanks for that. Izuku spun a pencil in his hand, staring straight forward as the teacher from the exam talked to his class, which included each of the kids he had worked with on the exams. In some ways, it was kind of funny. Have a teacher beat the shit out of some kids, then have them walk into class the next day and be able to function. He supposed maybe that was what heroism was like, punching people up then chatting it up right after. The first day was mostly just about the school's policies, their code of honor, and how to act with dignity. Stuff Izuku would probably be ignoring in pursuit of victory. Still, regardless of his cynicisms, he had succeeded. He was at a hero school. Now all he needed was to survive. Izuku stood outside the principal's office. His bandages and broken nose were minor in his opinion compared to how stiff he felt in the school uniform, so he probably wasn't exactly presentable. Still, the principal's office. The teacher had assured him that he'd get in, but once he was down from his high the fight had brought, Izuku had a single thought. Fuck, this hurts. Once that thought faded away, the next one was a general doubt. The man said for the exam to be fully complete he had to be beaten. If Izuku wasn't wrong, that still meant that the teachers would decide his score, meaning he could still realistically fail. He took a deep breath in, then out. He stepped into the office, perhaps even more so than the test. This might decide his fate. The principal of Shiketsu High sat in her chair, her back perfectly straight as she awaited a knock at her door. Her quirk was one of few kept under wraps in a nation of heroes who would freely publish things like super attacks. She considered it foolish. The quirk in question allowed her to read people's minds, something no one besides herself knew. Even the HPSC believed her ability to simply allow her to perfectly guess a person's next move. She'd be a fool to trust them after all. Her quirk allowed her to be a perfect judge of character. She could rip the masks off of people's faces and put what remained under a microscope. She knew exactly what kind of people those higher-ups were. She also knew Flashbang respected the child. She knew Crackle was actually very concerned for him. And as she heard a knock, she was soon to learn the true nature of the student. Enter. The boy held a calm exterior, his eyes taking in the area, before locking onto the principal. His mind was, in comparison, a whirlwind of information being taken, processed, then used. Within seconds, the boy made a rough guess at her personality and ideals. She approved. Quick thinking would be an aid to any potential hero. Izuku Midoriya, are you aware why you are here? The boy thought, his head somewhat spinning before freezing entirely. Outside of being quirkless, no clue. She could hear his internal dialogue as he commented on his annoyingly strong heartbeat. I did not call you here because of that. I was informed by both Flashbang, so that was the teacher's name, I thought I recognized him, and security cameras that you utilized support gear in the exam. She read his mind as sentences formed and broke in instants, attempting to somehow communicate what he wanted to say. The man who teaches me. Eraser would probably hate it if I name-dropped him. Told me that a quirk is just a tool, and that, since I was lacking a tool, I had to find other ways to be useful. Got pretty good at that, between the streams, Mei, and coding. One such way was to look into the legality of certain things in regards to my lack of a tool. That's totally a lie. Mei was the one who figured out the loophole. It was decided legally that unless I was utilizing a piece of equipment either to augment, enhance, or modify a quirk, or was trained with a quirk and licensed to use it, that nothing I held was support equipment. Discrimination for the win, I guess. So what I used, according to its legal definition, was a very useful bracelet. God, I hope she isn't quirkist. It'd suck if I actually got pretty far and got shot down so quick. The principal considered for a moment. Legality aside, do you not believe it goes against the spirit of the exams? His mind and mouth spoke in unison. I didn't care about the spirit of the exam. His internal dialogue was mostly screaming now, but he kept a cool face. I fully expected to face discrimination and frequent attempts to expel me. The only thought I had was to find some sort of way to force this school to accept me. His gaze broke and he looked away. I failed in that regard. So, I asked that if the point of this meeting is that, to inform me that Shiketsu doesn't take people like me, to please get it over with so I can spend my time more usefully. Yeah, gotta find a better roof to leap off of. The principal raised an eyebrow, both for the speech and the added mental comment at the end. She spoke after a moment of thought. That is not nor ever will be the prerogative of this school. I merely wished to know the reasoning behind such a breach of etiquette. Etiquette, huh? It'd be nice to know what being given that felt like. Then it is as I mentioned. I hold no delusions of my own strength. May taught me that the moment we had an armor-sling competition as a joke, and so I used every advantage I had. The ones accidentally gifted to me through legal loopholes being one of them. The principal regarded him carefully, before speaking once more. That mentality will serve you well as a hero. Some schools may have told you to be more impassioned or righteous. But if I may, we are in an occupation in which the lives of civilians hang constantly in the balance. So continue with that mentality, Izuku Midoriya. Bite, scratch, claw, crawl, stoop to any lows necessary to save even just one more person. She felt herself rise as she spoke. Due to the cards society handed you, you will never be popular. You would never reach the top 10. Not with the commission in charge, nor with the bias and prejudice of the population, so ignore them, continue your ceaseless battle with the world until it has no choice but to accept you. The boy's eyes had widened. The principal cleared her throat, then returned to her seat, collecting herself. However, I ask you to ponder what will happen after that. Once you have your license, once you are acknowledged, will you be able to rest, or are you fated to burn yourself into ash? I will be watching you with much interest. Dismissed. The boy stood and left, his mind a confused mess of emotions. Her school preached dignity and pride as their founding beliefs. But few besides those in charge learned what it felt like to know that focusing on that mentality had gotten people killed. This boy especially should assume the world to be constantly against him. Perhaps he should act with more dignity, to always be the better man, to take the high road and garner more and more support from the population. But Izuku Midoriya was more simple than that. He didn't want to be a saint. He didn't want to lead a revolution. He wanted to be a hero. A mind is a private thing, something that was never meant to be peered into. The boy leaving her room held one of darkness and depression, one of ceaseless agony and defiance. It was as if he'd been kicked to the ground so much he had simply learned to lay down, and to receive only the kick and not the fall. Yet despite that, he held on. His desire for acknowledgement pushed him forward until he picked himself back up and started fighting back. She merely worried that, should he ever achieve his goals, that spite, that desire that dragged him beyond his limits, would simply disappear. That would truly be a tragic end for such a unique mind. The apartment was cold and empty, sad, decrepit, cheap. Izuku looked at it and felt gears turning in his mind. 𝐀𝐻's childhood home had been too far away, and so his mother had sent him off to a nearby school. He had originally been worried the money would be too difficult, but Shiketsu surprisingly offered scholarship money specifically for moving kids. And so Izuku had qualified, landing himself a nice little apartment in the middle of nowhere. He started pinning large pieces of paper up on his walls. They would soon hold his quirk analysis information and any blueprints he came up with to run by Mei. He was her assistant after all. He had to put some work in to make Hatsume Industries the best it could be. Izuku sat in his apartment and slowly realized something. He didn't want to die anymore. The principal's words worked their way into his head. That desire for survival, it was what had been fueling him. Without it, would he still manage? He found that his drive hadn't diminished at all. In fact, he wanted to be a hero even more now. Now, he had proved to himself that he could. It wasn't a pipe dream, it wasn't meaningless. He could really succeed. He took another deep breath and started working on blueprints. Circuitry hummed, metal clashed on metal, machines groaned and screeched. Mei was in a wonderland rivaled only by her own garage, though her equipment was nowhere near as high quality thanks to UA's absurd funding. Her mood was somewhat dampened by things like adult supervision, the fact that this period was supposed to be just for blueprints, and her classmates' general aversion to her explosive personality or explosive general area. It was times like this that made her Miss Assistant. She had gotten used to working with the extra pair of hands. Maybe she could make another pair of hands. Robot hands. If she plugged Pandora's code in its juvenile state into them, she could have them work with her. She drafted the blueprint with haste and delivered it to the teacher. He looked at it with confusion. What on earth am I looking at? Robot arms. Self-learning ones too. The teacher squinted at the drawing. What's Pandora code? Pandora's my best baby yet. I made her with my assistant. One of the kids in the class looked at her. He spoke in a confused tone. You have an assistant. Hatsumi beamed a bright smile out. Yup, good old vegetable cunt. Powerloader spoke next. Vegetable? His hair looks like broccoli. The boy spoke, his curiosity seemingly not at all sated by her wonderful explanations. Is this like a family butler situation? Or like a sibling? Nope. I picked him up from the beach, and he's been my head assistant ever since. One of the other girls looked up from their work. She spoke with a weird inflection in her voice. Hey, goodness, has young love found you already? May just beamed brightly at her. I don't know what love feels like, but I feel the same way about him I feel about my babies. Powerloader held up a hand. Hang on, romance aside. What on earth is Pandora? And why does it have self-learning eye also? Is it support equipment you handed out without a license? May cackled at him. In anyone else's hands, absolutely. But assistant can't legally ever use support equipment. The boy spoke again. What on earth does that mean? Here can't support someone's quirk if they don't have one. Powerloader waited by the gates of UA. His problem child sat next to him, working on the shell of a robotic arm with just her toolkit she brought from home. He was motivated mostly by his own curiosity. A quirkless assistant who worked with May. That kind of person had to have an interesting personality, right? Not to mention the specs on the robot arm May had made. Whatever her best invention yet entailed, it was probably something powerful. The vast majority of people had already left. The kid apparently went to a school pretty far away. They heard footsteps and May picked her gear up and started running in the direction of the boy. Powerloader got a good look at him, and his eyes subsequently widened. The most obvious thing to notice was the unmistakable uniform of Shiketsu High. The second things he picked up on were the large eye bags and the odd arm braces he had. Then, of course, the fact that he looked like he had been in a few back-to-back boxing matches. Between the broken nose, bandaged face, an odd combination of forming and fading bruises, the splotched purple and red on his knuckles especially, showed that the nature of his injuries was a fight, and that he was no pacifist. The girl crashed into him in a heap, going for a leaping hug. The boy wobbled in catching her, but managed. He spoke with a small smile. Hey May, how was UA's nursery? She detached herself from the boy, grinning wildly. It'll be perfect for our babies. All the gear is so high quality. It's like they had unlimited money. The boy gave a low chuckle. They probably did. #1 hero school in the world, remember? The girl spoke excitedly to him, and the boy's eyes darted to Powerloader. His eyes held none of the affection he regarded the girl with, and looked into Powerloader with intensive scrutiny. For a moment, it felt like all Powerloader could see was jade green before the sensation faded. The kid unnerved him. But he was a teacher. He was used to weird kids, so he walked up to the two and spoke. Vegetable cunt. The boy's expression turned from dead-eyed to exacerbated as he looked at his explosive friend. You do know my actual name, don't you? Of course, assistant. She didn't elaborate. And the boy rolled his eyes. He reached his hand out, and Powerloader took it. Izuku Midoriya, better known as assistant. Powerloader nodded. Powerloader, our teacher. He noticed the large armbands the boy was wearing, so he pointed to it. That the Pandora I've heard so much about. Midoriya raised his hand up, showing it off. Yeah, this thing carried me through the Shiketsu exam. Powerloader felt his eyes widen once more. He supposed he should have put 2 and 2 together, but if the kid was quirkless, went to Shiketsu, and got through the exam, that would make the kid the very first quirkless hero in training. Powerloader relented that at least that would explain the bruises and injuries. He felt no small degree of worry for the kid now, so decided to offer even a little help. You all right there, kiddo? You, look a little hurt. I can get recovery girl to take a look at you. The kid's nose scrunched up in a weird way. Yeah, I'm fine. Shiketsu's got their own nurse. I'm fine. His repetition of the words I'm fine weren't particularly comforting. But in the end, Shiketsu was far away from UA, and the two kids walked off. Maybe he could check in with Nezu, see if he can't get some more information. The world's first quirkless hero, huh? He couldn't help but think he was seeing the start of something a bit bigger. Izuku stretched his neck to the side while he sat in class. A few of the students near him were talking as he took notes on them. The ones from the exam specifically. Each of them were sitting next to each other and hadn't gotten a chance to talk, so were using the few minutes before class to swap info. The alligator mutation quirked boy sat with his arms crossed. Just call me ally. The girl who had used an illusion she called a glam burst out laughing. What? Like the American way of saying alligator? The boy bit down on his teeth with a snap. No, it's just a coincidence. Whatevs, just call me by my first name, 𝐀𝐦. The boy with purple hair sat in front of them, reading a book, but snapped the book shut as he talked. Both of you hush, reflect on yourselves and try to remember that you represent Shiketsu. The two both smirked, then answered, Yes, senpai. The boy turned to them fully now. I've told you already. My name is Seiji Shishikura, and I'm in the same year. They spoke in sync once more. Yes, senpai. Before each broke out giggling. The hair-covered student started laughing as well, turning to join the conversation. If we're giving nicknames, feel free to call me Chewy. Like Chewbacca. Kamiya squealed. OMG. That's so adorbs. Izuku wasn't even aware of modern lingo but was pretty sure no one had said adorbs in centuries. An incredibly loud voice then joined them. We are introducing ourselves. Yes. My name is Sayurashi. A pleasure to meet everyone. Suddenly, each of them looked at Izuku, which he noticed when he looked up from writing down their names to see them all. He snapped his pencil out of reflex. Sorry. Izuku Midoriya, my friend, just calls me assistant, or broccoli, or vegetable. 𝐀𝐦 spoke with a laugh. Vegetable? That's hilarious. That friend of yours seems like a totes neat dude. Girl. Hatsume, she was the one who built Pandora. Izuku pointed to his gauntlets. The members of the group who had seen him fight all raised eyebrows. Ally spoke first, a hand raised. Sorry, that's not a quirk. Izuku regarded them all, before answering. Unquirkless. He catalogued each reaction carefully. Ally was hard to read, but visibly reeled back. 𝐀𝐻's eyes widened. Ina-san didn't react at all. And Chewy was, well, a ball of hair. An awkward silence filled the area, finally broken by Ally. So, all the shields, nets, and earplugs. That was all just a machine. Yeah, May and I have been building her since summer started. She's programmed with a self-learning eye, so she's specifically fitted to me. May says she's actually starting to get a little more intelligent than either of us predicted. But otherwise, just equipment. He pointed to his numerous bruises. Of course, if I rely too heavily on it, I get hurt. But it functions as a good equalizer. Chewy spoke next. Who exactly is this, Mei Hatsume? Future CEO of Hatsume Industries. Also currently a student of UA's support course. First year, like us. Seiji spoke next. A first-year student made a weapon capable of fighting on par with a member of Shiketsu's staff. He seemed to be in disbelief. Not a weapon. Pandora has no offensive capabilities. It couldn't, otherwise the fact that I own it would be super problematic. It certainly gives me an upper hand, but every hit the teacher had on him was all me. Izuku brandished his knuckles, a strip of bruised and abused flesh lining his knuckles, each one round and centered on a knuckle, like droplets of purple dye had fallen on his hand and painted them with proof of his battle. Izuku had noted to the Shiketsu support course that he'd greatly appreciate something to cover his hands with in the future so that something like that wouldn't happen again. But he was pretty sure Mei was working on something herself anyway, and chances were she'd have made a much better piece of equipment. Inasa laughed when he saw Izuku's hand. Amazing. A mark of your passion and courage in a fight. I greatly respect your white-hot passion. In the future, let's fight against each other. Izuku rubbed the back of his neck. Sure, Pandora would appreciate the data for combating wind pressure. 𝐀𝐻 had moved to stare inches away from Izuku's gauntlets. Whoa, so these guys are like, alive. Ooh, kinda. We can't fully parse what it added or subtracted from its own code, but we know it set a routine for understanding my desires, and trying to imitate them to figure out its intention. So, it might be able to vaguely understand emotions, but it can't talk, nor fight. Its nature as defensive equipment. 𝐀𝐻 gave it a poke, retracting her hand as if it'd bite her. Nothing happened. It isn't on right now. The teacher interrupted their little gathering, and the group all returned to their seats as Flashbang walked up, his only mark from the exam being a few band-aids where branches scratched him, his broken nose having been healed by the nurse. All right, class, nothing new is happening today. We study quirk law, practice theoreticals, then do safety training. Practice combat comes once the head nurse clears you all as not soon to kill each other. Though, he stated that you all are one of the best classes he's seen in recent years. Take pride in that fact, and continue applying yourself. The class nodded their heads in sync. Izuku honestly really liked the militaristic school. There wasn't as much free time his old school gave them, which was often used to terrorize him in some way or another. And anyone whose quirk discharged randomly would be lightly reprimanded, then talked with after class regarding control issues, or the necessity for controlled discharge times. It was comforting to know that no one would attack him in the middle of class. If that wasn't the bare minimum, he honestly didn't know what was. He did notice Seiji shooting odd glances his way, but didn't bother with acknowledging them. If he had a problem with Izuku, he could either bring it to his face, or Izuku could ignore it. He went through the heroics course easily, as the teacher was guiding them each through basic fighting forms, ensuring the students wouldn't hurt each other while sparring. Eraser had been putting him through this at the very start of their training. but returning to the basics was always nice. He was chosen to spar against the teacher as an example, and stepped up into the boxing ring the gym had with ease. The teacher entered his fighting position, and Izuku entered his. The two started exchanging light blows with speed and precision. Izuku smiled as he stumbled back from a blow. He really had made it. Seiji Shishikura watched as the quirkless child and the dignified member of Shiketsu High sparred in the ring. As long as he lived, Seiji believed that the only heroes that could truly be effective were those who held themselves above their opponent. All Might was of course a perfect example. The Titan would never stoop to a low to defeat an opponent, and acted with great dignity. The boy, on the other hand, the boy had pulled hair and exploited loopholes. Add his quirkless nature on top of it, and Seiji was beginning to find that he couldn't respect the admittedly genius classmate. Perhaps he should manipulate the situation. The boy doubted his ability to defeat the quirkless child. The child's defense system he wore, Pandora, was almost a perfect counter to his own quirk. Seiji could already imagine what a fight between them would look like. The boy's defense system skewering his meatballs as he slowly approached Seiji before physically overpowering him. The boy dodged effortlessly past blows that appeared to blur at the speeds they were moving. It angered Seiji. The boy had strength. He could act with dignity, but chose to fight in his brutal way when push came to shove. Such a person shouldn't remain in an honorable institution such as Shiketsu. It may be presumptuous of him, but Seiji would aid the school in amending their mistake. Around a week had passed. The internet was abuzz with news of villains attacking UA. Izuku personally thought it was just to avoid them talking about the fact the news basically rioted into the school after hearing that All Might was teaching there. The hypocrite. If the man truly only believed Izuku to not be capable because even All Might could get injured, then the man by principle should never endorse any student, save one stronger than him as for the attack itself. No casualties whatsoever. Not surprising, hypocrite he was, All Might was still overwhelmingly strong. It made Izuku's blood pump thinking about the man, and an intense hate filled his heart before he calmed himself down. It wouldn't be worth picking literally unwinnable battles. Izuku changed out of his gym uniform and into his school uniform. He stretched his neck out as he walked out of his locker room. He felt arms grab him and pull him somewhere dark. He waited. He probably wouldn't be attacked on school grounds right after you. After a moment, he saw the face of 𝐀𝐦, inches from his, her hands pressing the wall his back was against. A dark smoke was coming out of her mouth, blocking them from view next to the exit of the boys' locker room. They remained making eye contact as the illusion held and each other boy left. The girl's eyes closed near the end, straining herself to make the illusion hold until Seiji finally left, his head scanning from left to right. After a moment, 𝐀𝐦 let out a sigh of relief, before smirking at Izuku. "Hey there, Veggie-kun. Figured you might want a heads up on something." Izuku raised an eyebrow. He spoke calmly. "What might that be?" "There was a school newspaper released today. Normally nothing huge, a few sponsorships with promising third years, advice for freshmen, the usual. Today, the headlines were about a quirkless hero course student." Izuku frowned, then let out a sigh. "I suppose I should have expected it to get out, just wasn't expecting it to be that fast. As the resident drama expert, yeah, you should have seen this coming. Here's the big scoop though." 𝐀𝐦 leaned in closer, until her bust was pressing into Izuku and her lips were whispering into his ears. Izuku felt a blush rise without warning. "There's a group of students protesting outside the classroom." She pulled back enough to see his blush, then removed herself with a smirk. "Don't get too excited now. I'm sure that genius lover of yours will get jealous." Where she pressed a finger to her lip. "Maybe she'd be even more interested. I go both ways." She giggled before walking away. "GL." Izuku took a few calming breaths. He reaffirmed his desire to get more immunity to being embarrassed before he started walking to class. As he was warned, there were a group of people waiting outside his class, some with sheets of paper as impromptu signs. The group hadn't actually prepared anything for protesting. Each was simply so enraged by the idea of his existence they felt the need to do something. He shouldered past one of them, and they yelled out to watch it. Before their eyes widened at the sight of him, he yelled while trying to grab Izuku's wrist. "Found the geneless." Geneless was a derogatory term for the quirkless. Izuku wasn't that familiar with it. Most who knew him had more personal insults they used. The kid's hand reached Izuku's arm, and Izuku turned the momentum around, grabbing the kid's hand and twisting it, bringing it behind the kid's back, and forcing him to his knees as he tried to tug uselessly to free his arm. The other protesters saw him, each unsure what to do, some seeming to almost froth at the mouth wanting to attack him. He spoke calmly. "Move out of my way." There was a clamoring, and Izuku's new friend shut it down as Izuku forced a shout out of him. "I'll say it again, move." He looked at each of them, forcing all his rage into his vision. It was a phenomenon he called bloodlust. Some scientists believed that humans had unconscious methods of communication which allowed the concept of instinct. People would respond based on what that unconscious method told them. Mothers knowing if their baby was in trouble was a good example, and heroes or cops sometimes getting the sense something was about to happen as well. But to simplify, people could naturally, to a degree, read other people's intent or desires. Bloodlust was the intent to harm. It was the desire to harm superimposed over all other emotions and brought out of the body to such an extent that people could physically feel it. It can't be faked. Izuku, for the first time in his life now, Lethi's rage and anger run loose in his mind. To steal an assassin's term, his whole body was white-hot with rage. He felt it in each pore, in each inch of skin, through his blood, and composing his bones. Overwhelming hate filled him. He hated the insignificant pieces of shit who seemed to follow him around, forcing their way to impairing him. Who were they to judge him? Who were they to try to stop him? The air thickened, and each kid that looked into Izuku's eyes felt a natural response. The same way a rabbit can tell if a hunter is watching it. The feeling that something desperately wanted to kill it. Something was inches away from harming it, and desperately desired to do so. No one spoke, and a few kids moved out of the way. Izuku dropped the kid, who had frozen, and rubbed his wrist as he walked forward into his class without impairment. Get in my way again, and I'll kill each of you. As the last student of the class to enter, he closed the door behind him. 𝐀𝐦 rested her chin on her hand as she watched the show from her desk. 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗀𝐿 was a very interesting person. 𝐀𝐦 considered herself to have a good eye for people, and he was a unique mismatch of traits. He blushed really easily dealing with her, then could turn around and scare the fight out of a bunch of kids. He couldn't talk without rambling on about something, but kept himself generally cool and collected. As she looked into his emerald eyes, he gave her a slight nod and sat down. The year would be interesting with him around. 𝐀𝐦 hoped he'd last, so she decided to try helping him out if he needed it. Though if any classmate just walked up to her and asked, she'd help them. 𝐀𝐦 liked helping people, came with the territory, being a hero in training and all. She checked her phone as she heard their teacher struggling through the students. A news tabloid had already picked up the story, and while no one would really trust them, more reputable brands would soon verify, and a picture of the newspaper was already on the net. 𝐀𝐦 let out a sigh. Drama seekers were really awful. Her eyes darted to Seiji, who was continuously glancing at the crowd outside the classroom. 𝐀𝐦 was good at reading emotions, so why was their friend feeling guilty? She had a pretty good idea. She wasn't dumb after all, no matter what people thought about her. Flashbang struggled his way past the door, closing it behind him. Goodness, as members of Shiketsu, I hope each of you will conduct yourself in a more appropriate manner. 𝐀𝐦 stretched her arms as she got ready for the final period of the day. Her new friend will probably need some help getting home. Izuku stood in front of the principal once more. She looked at him, not saying anything and simply watching him. After a moment, she spoke. We won't be expelling you. Izuku didn't respond. However, people are demanding it, as is we cannot fully guarantee your safety. The boy spoke after a moment. I want my family's safety guaranteed, if not mine. He thought about his mother and hardened his resolve. He'd never let something hurt her, even if it cost him both the trial and his dream. The dignified woman pierced him with her eyes. Of course, that'd be done regardless. She'll be moved to a safe location, and we'll keep the location hidden. Izuku nodded. He idly noted her usage of the word she, despite him never clarifying. In that case, I've been dealing with bullies all my life. If they come at me, I'll fight to prove my place. The woman considered his words. That is acceptable. We shall make that statement known to the public. I should let it be known, however, that if you continuously amass outrageous wounds from outside threats, you will have to be expelled for your own safety if nothing else. That's nothing new. The principal steepled her hands and looked at him. Before sighing after a moment, she stood and bowed deeply. I apologize. This goes against our rules and our ideology. It should never have come to pass. As someone who passed our exam, you should be welcome. I wish I could help more, but our funding is being held hostage. Inadequate an excuse as it may be, all I can offer is my apology. Izuku felt his eyes widen. She was apologizing to him. A person of authority, direct authority over him, was apologizing. Izuku's eyes softened, and his metal somewhat fell apart as someone genuinely apologized to him. It's not your fault. People try to take me down a notch wherever I go. Izuku was annoyed by how easily his resolve would break when someone was nice to him. He felt some confusion as he walked out of her office. He had thought he was utterly alone in this world, hated by all but his mother. But as time went on, he met more and more people who had treated him with respect, with dignity, with fairness. Mei's energetic acceptance of his help, Aizawa's tired but helpful demeanor, 𝐀𝐦's random and seemingly unconditional aid, and now the principal bowing her head to him. Was he Was he wrong about the world? Could he have found a place without being a hero? Could he have given up without jumping? Izuku considered it for a second, living a normal life. He was a bit too far gone for that. He had his resolve, he couldn't lose it now. Izuku stepped out of a black car the next morning to see a crowd of people each holding signs in front of his school. Out with the old, give the spot to someone deserving. God hates the quirkless. I like holding signs. Besides the odd last one, each had a hateful or taunting message. Izuku listened to the crash course he had been given on media presence and walked forward, not looking at any of the various people. Anyone who got too close was fended off by one of the members of the staff. The protesters were absolutely roaring. Izuku couldn't hear his own thoughts over the jeers and yells of the protesters. It reminded him of his fight with Flashbang. The all-encompassing noise faded to be normal as he walked, acclimating to it. He walked at his normal pace, acting entirely unbothered by the protesters. After a few steps, a rock sailed through the air and impacted Izuku's head. The surprise attack caused him to stumble a step, stopping for a moment as he collected himself. He touched the spot and felt blood. The protesters redoubled their noise machine, as it started to feel like the very air was collapsing on him, pushing him down. He looked at the red blood and started laughing. It shut the protesters up as they all saw what he was doing and slowly quieted. His laugh turned wheezing until he sucked in a great quantity of air. He looked in the direction of the rock thrower and spoke with a giggle. "Throw it harder next time, I barely felt that." The sound redoubled once more and he walked in. Class 1 sat at their desks, having been given some free time between classes. As they did, Kaminari, Kirishima, and Mina all sat around a phone. The video playing on it was titled Shiketsu's Brutal Quirkless Student. It had opened with a video taken obviously by phone in a crowded hall. It showed a green-haired student with large eye bags holding another student in a painful position. The silence of the hall allowed his words to be heard clearly. "Get out of my way." No one shifted, and the energy of the student changed, looking with intense rage out at the students. "I'll say it again, move." There was some shifting in the crowd as the boy let go of his hold and walked past the mob without acknowledging them. "Get in my way again, and I'll kill each of you." The video then abruptly cut to the same kid walking into the school amidst a swarm of reporters and protesters. After a second, a rock impacted the boy, staggering him slightly. He responded with abrupt laughter before speaking. "Throw it harder next time, I barely felt that." The boy then walked off without making another comment. Some obnoxious music came from the video outro as the trio talked. Kirishima spoke first. "So manly." Kaminari gave him a weird look. "That fits your version of manly. That dude's terrifying." Mina made a humming noise as she spoke. "Scary." Kirishima was undeterred. "Come on guys. He's fighting against discrimination. That's totally manly." Both of his friends shrugged at that. A frog-like voice interrupted their conversation. "What are you guys watching, Ribbit?" The three all jumped as Tsu was suddenly looking over their shoulders. Kirishima recovered first, speaking loud enough the rest of the class could hear him. "Shiketsu has a quirkless hero course student." There were various reactions to that. A few scattered cheers or claps came, most from Uraraka, Shoji, and some very tentative ones from Kuda. Bakugo looked like he was about to bust a gasket. He spoke clearly and without any inflection. "What's he look like?" "𝗷𝗵𝗲. Didn't think you'd be interested. He's got real curly green hair and some real green eyes too." A large bang was heard from inside the room as Bakugo's quirk activated on its own. Izuku's statement was published to the media. "He won't be intimidated out of his position, give it your best try." He was walking the streets of his childhood apartment with a box of notebooks in his arms. They had been left in the apartment before he had been moved, the commute far too long for him to stay in the Mustafa area. He had gone back to get them. As he walked the streets at night, he immersed himself in being under the moonlight once more. As he walked, the streetlights illuminating his step, he heard a familiar voice call out to him. "Deku." He let out a sigh. It had been such a nice night. He stopped between two of the lights and his form was somewhat hidden as he turned to face his former friend. Bakugo was just as he remembered, each of his features amplified as a streetlight shone directly on him. The boy had a scowl on his face. "What the fuck do you think you're doing? Walking to my apartment? We moved out, I suppose that's relevant. I thought Mom left Auntie a note though." The boy's hands popped a few times, and Izuku subtly flipped the switch on Pandora to on. "That's not what I meant. Why the fuck are you at Shiketsu?" Izuku paused looking at him. He took a deep breath in and ignored his question, asking one of his own, "Why do you care?" I could get it if I was at UA. You'd see that as a personal attack. But now you're going out of your way to track me down. Why? Why do you care? Shouldn't I just be a stepping stone for you? We've already parted ways." Bakugo's hands popped once more. "I don't answer to a fucking Deku. Why don't you get it? You're nothing. Useless. Pathetic. So stop trying to be something. It's disgusting, watching someone like you keep throwing yourself against a wall over and over again." Izuku dropped his box and began walking towards Bakugo, stepping into the light of the streets, marching up until he was face to face with Bakugo. Close enough that Bakugo could see the myriad of marks and bruises on his face. The black eye, which he had originally gotten from Mei, had healed. Then he got another one in the exam, the padding on his still healing nose, and more recently a gash on his forehead where the rock hit him. The most notable change to his old friend's appearance was the cynical look in his eyes. and the deep bags underneath them. The boy gave a dry smile. I think I get it. You're frustrated and are taking it out on me. 𝐻𝐸𝐬's eyes narrowed. You were involved in that villain attack, right? The boy scoffed. Yeah, what of it? Let me guess. You weren't able to do anything, you. He laughed before he finished his statement. You were useless. 𝐻𝐸𝐬's fist moved before he even thought about it. But all it met was a metal plate, causing him to wince at the sensation of metal on hand. Izuku moved at the same time as him, slamming his fist into 𝐻𝐸𝐬's chest. 𝐻𝐸𝐬 gagged at the sensation. Izuku had been training as if his life had depended on it, because it had. He still wasn't as strong as Mei, but he wasn't supposed to be. Eraser had taught him how to properly use all of what he had. All of which to say, 𝐻𝐸𝐬 felt like a sledgehammer had tried its best to make its way through his chest. 𝐻𝐸𝐬 was strong though, and didn't back down. His quirk activated again, propelling his other fist much faster than any other attack Izuku had faced. And his fist landed on Izuku's already broken nose before Pandora could react. Who the fuck do you think you are? Izuku stood his ground as well, stumbling a step but not faltering, and neither moved. 𝐻𝐸𝐬, I won't answer a useless person. The boy growled, and another explosive propelled fist came at him. Pandora was prepared this time, and a rope connected Izuku's arm to the ground, then pulled, forcing Izuku out of the way. 𝐻𝐸𝐬 followed the blow with a second in quick succession with his other hand, which a metal plate came to stop as Izuku threw out his own jab-straight combo. The first blow missed as 𝐻𝐸𝐬 dodged, but the second hit, forcing 𝐻𝐸𝐬 to stagger back. Izuku flexed his already incredibly bruised hand. You know, I wonder when you realized we weren't friends anymore. I know it's pretty dumb, but it probably took me until you told me to kill myself. 𝐻𝐸𝐬 held his palm out to blow Izuku up, but was met by Izuku's own hand, grabbing him and throwing him over his shoulder, the repositioning sending 𝐻𝐸𝐬 into the dark spot between streetlights. The effect almost gave Izuku a spotlight to act with as he looked down on his old friend who had already recovered and was standing strong. It's honestly kinda funny. I mean, honestly, I almost did. 𝐻𝐸𝐬's step faltered, though he didn't show it. I stood on a building not far from here and considered it. Stop fucking around. Izuku laughed hysterically. Oh, I wish I was. I wish I was just playing with your emotions. But 𝐻𝐸𝐬, did you forget your own words? I really do want to be a hero. 𝐻𝐸𝐬 stared into the eyes of his old friend, expecting to see nerves, fear, anxiety. All he could see was the encompassing void of green and darkness. 𝐻𝐸𝐬 spoke with a frown, something softer than his scowl. The fuck happened to you? Izuku's theatrical demeanor broke after a moment of tension, and he sagged into his own skin. The vitriol, the hysterics, it all was swept away easily like wind-blowing sand. All that was left in his old friend was exhaustion. He spoke in an incredibly tired voice. 𝐻𝐸𝐬, I really just want to be a hero. I don't get why people don't get that. I have to fight like this, otherwise I have nothing left. 𝐻𝐸𝐬 scoffed. I don't know what you think you're getting out of this. Why can't you get it through your thick fucking skull? You're useless. Izuku dropped his guard, looking upward to the moon instead. I'm starting to think everyone is. The fuck are you talking about? The day I almost killed myself, I met the sludge villain first. 𝐻𝐸𝐬's eyes widened, and an instinctual pop came from his palm at the mention of the villain. Yeah, I get it. Izuku clutched a hand around his own throat. The choking, the crushing on your lungs as air is shoveled out of you. His hands dropped limp once more. All Might saved me. He laughed slightly. 𝐻𝐸𝐬, he's a fake. Huh, you love All Might. I love the idea of All Might. All of us do. I'm the only one who met the man, not the symbol. He's tired, old, injured, and cynical. It's all right if you don't believe me. Next time you see him ask about his skinny form, should prove I'm right. This rant have a goddamn point. He crushed my dreams, told me I'd just end up dead, and should consider police work. That was the day I considered ending my own life. But as I looked to the moonlit sky I thought, was anyone really worth anything? Does anyone matter? I don't really think so. So what? You're a fucking nihilist. Doesn't make you anything special. Izuku just sighed. Look, 𝐻𝐸𝐬, you came up to me. You wanted to know what happened, so there. Now, are we going to fight until a hero spots us, or are you going to have to find a new person to relieve stress on? 𝐻𝐸𝐬 clicked his tongue. I just wanted to remind you what your place is. Whatever helps you sleep at night. I know I don't. Izuku walked past 𝐻𝐸𝐬 easily, almost not acknowledging the boy as he grabbed his notebooks and walked past him. 𝐻𝐸𝐬 watched the form of his incredibly different friend walk off. He turned himself, walking forward a few feet and turning a corner. He heard the boy's words in his head once more. You were useless. Shouldn't I just be a stepping stone? Does anyone matter? I don't really think so. You're frustrated and just taking it out on me. 𝐻𝐸𝐬 clenched his fist tightly, then slammed it into the nearby streetlight. He swore as he did. He looked down at the ground. I have worth, damn it. He sank to his knees. I'm fucking better than him. He hadn't even wanted to meet fucking Deku. He just wanted to go for a walk around the area. His chest tightened as he felt himself going back to that damn training facility. He saw his teacher's head get pounded into the ground. He saw himself get in the way of 13, causing them to get seriously injured. He slammed his hand into the pole again, his body shaking as he cried, "I'm fucking strong. I'm going to be number one." He felt pathetic as his tears flowed freely, illuminated by the street light. "I'm going to be number one." Izuku stretched his back as he walked into the dojo, where a bandaged-up eraser head was sitting on one end. He very desperately wanted to tell the man to go home and rest, but he also got it. Sometimes, resting and recovering from pain was much worse than pushing through it. Still, it wouldn't stop him from making jokes about it. You get hit by a truck or something. Hilarious. Hey man, to each their own. You got hit with a truck, I got hit by a rock, it's really all the same. I'm well aware, my class won't stop talking about it. Izuku raised an eyebrow. What do you mean class? Class 1 at UA. Izuku let the words sink in. You never told me. It would impair your drive if you were given a cop-out. Plus, you weren't wrong in your assessment. Things might have been worse for you at UA. I'm no coddler. And All Might is an awful teacher. I'm telling you now so you're aware you have options. This will be good training for you, to be a public enemy. But if things get overwhelming, you have a place to go to. I won't ever give up, sensei. All you kids are so much trouble. Whatever, do some suicides before I get sick of looking at your face. Can you even see my face through those wraps? Oh great pharaoh of UA. I can see you aren't running. Get moving. Izuku let out a content sigh as he looked at the UA support course equipment. Wei, who was standing next to him, mirrored his sentiment. I know, right? It's all just so nice. Izuku picked up one of the wrenches, feeling its weight and grip. It really is. I didn't even know there were that many levels of quality to these things. To avoid drawing attention to Mei, he was wearing the mask he'd wear for streams, the one with the moon on it. Shiketsu had gotten out earlier than usual. The staff said something about one of the protesters trying to break in, and so each of them were released early. Izuku was starting to get somewhat worried. He stood by his statement, but the protesters had been seemingly unfazed by the passing of a few days, and continued to harass anyone who even came close to the horde. It was going to reach a breaking point soon, which was all the more reason for him to be here, working with Mei on some equipment. He spoke as she returned to working on a school project. Right, first things first, I want to be able to talk with Pandora. Really, I mainly want to be able to plug my analysis into her, so it can stop learning things by breaking my nose. Sounds like fun. I'll give it a basic port for data, and a little synthetic voice. It'll take a while for it to figure out language though. As long as the option for plugging in analysis directly is there, I can manage. Okie dokie, I'll get started on that code. She handed him a wrench. I need you to finish up the body of the robo-arm baby. Izuku nodded. The whole classroom was just the two of them. It seemed like the rest of the support course was actually taking classes. Izuku had been accepted in as a visitor, and since then hadn't seen a single person. He'd questioned how she managed to get away with this, but she was a genuine genius. It wouldn't surprise him if she already had the number spot for test scores in the entire course. They probably let her do whatever so long as her grades didn't slip. Mechanics may be a weird way to unwind, but Izuku couldn't deny he was relaxing as he used the honestly extravagant welder to put some finishing touches on the arm. They had mostly completed it. All he needed to do was finish the body, then give it some guts. He was interrupted as a knock came to the door. 𝐻𝐸 walked to the support course side of UA, her costume in hand. She had thought it was fine, but Eraser Sensei said she should talk to them regardless about having more protective gear. The door opened to a boy in a welder's mask. He pulled it up to reveal another mask. Hilariously, his deep tired eyes looked at her, or her seemingly floating uniform more accurately. The boy had a pad on his nose, a black eye, and a bad scratch on the side of his head, but it didn't undercut his appearance. If anything, the several scratches and wounds only seemed to amplify his looks, each scratch and bruise adding a dark contrast to each of his lighter features, like his very cute curly green hair. 𝐻𝐸 was taken out of her staring as he spoke. Ooh, his voice was deep too. Hello. 𝐻𝐸 shook herself a bit. Remember your goal, girl? Hello. Sorry, I'm here for some more protective gear. She handed the boy her current gear. He squinted at it. Did you lose some of it? Nope, that's everything. He gave her a look. Please tell me your equipment isn't literally shoes and gloves. Why? Is something wrong with that? He stared at her unblinking. The proximity caused 𝐻𝐸 to turn away with a blush. I could name literally 100 reasons that's a problem. He walked into the room gesturing for her to follow while he spoke. Listen, do you know the #1 cause of civilian and hero casualties in fights? Oh no. A pop quiz. Works. Nope. Debris. Falling pipes. Chunks of concrete. Toppling buildings. Hell, falling flower beds with pots a little too heavy have a higher hero kill count than some of the worst villains. So, to have just no protection whatsoever is kinda awful. Especially if you get hurt and your friends literally can't find you to help you. The boy was making some admittedly fair points. But if I have stuff on me, it messes with my invisibility. Not necessarily. He handed her something from his bag. It was a protein bar. Take a bite out of that. She was confused, but did so anyway. He took notes on her eating, which was kinda embarrassing. After a moment, his notebook snapped shut. Thought so. What? Your quirk isn't invisible skin. It's a body that obscures its features. Is there a difference? If your body was invisible, we should be able to see the food you eat as your stomach dissolved it. Instead it disappears. That'd be so embarrassing. The boy gave a slight nod before shouting into the room. May, what is it? Baby making not going well. 𝐻𝐸 blushed heavily. Nah, the baby's fine. Someone else came by. You know if we have any mouth guards around here. The sound of walking was heard and 𝐻𝐸 soon laid eyes on the very pink dreadlocks of May Hatsume. Her eyes locked onto her and she trailed a circle around her after a moment. Good call, assistant. I'll go see if Power Loader Sensei has any. 𝐻𝐸 tilted her invisible head. Assistant. I never introduced myself. The boy extended a hand. Izuku Midoriya, May's assistant. She shook his hand and happened to feel the calluses on them. She also felt his very adequate arm strength. She admitted to herself that she may be crushing a little bit. As he retracted his hand, she also noticed that his knuckles were bruised pretty heavily. Are you all right? I feel like there should be more safety measures around here if you've gotten this beat up. The boy turned his hand over looking at the bruises. I didn't get those here. Well, except the black eye. May's got a killer right hook. The boy spoke with a glint of humor. It was at that moment when May returned, a mouth guard in hand. He had some. He mentioned something about ordering them for training, but none of the teachers ever used them. The boy took it out of her hands and walked over to a Tupperware bin full of electronics. This might take a bit, around 30 minutes. What are you doing? It's not a real fix. So much as a band-aid, but I'm going to plug a few bits and bobbles into this mouth guard. It should read your vitals and send a distress message to any nearby heroes if you go down, along with your exact location. After that, it might take you a hot second to learn, but I can make it so you can send Morse code messages by biting down. You'll need some friends you trust to work with, and I can outfit them with basic earpieces capable of reading them. The girl who had been working with no noise but a few pops chimed in. Broccoli-kun, I think you're forgetting you don't actually go here. The boy stopped suddenly, his cheeks going red, and he stopped working with wires to rub the back of his neck. I'll just work on it on my own. That's fine. Besides, I gotta branch out a little, right, May? Power Loader Sensei is going to be mad. Still, you're right. It's about time you started doing things without me. She drew a fake tear down her face with a finger. They grow up so fast. We've already made that joke. 𝐻𝐸 looked at them with confusion. Not that they could really read that on her face. Izuku actually seemed to pick up on it. I don't actually work with you. I'm a friend of May's who works as her helper. He pointed to a little badge on his chest, which had the words visitor printed on them. Oh, that makes sense. It didn't. Why did that girl have a whole assistant as a first year? Where do you go then? The boy started moving once more, organizing parts he'll need into different piles. I just got into Shiketsu. It was then something finally clicked in 𝐻𝐸's mind. She exclaimed loudly while waving her arms around excitedly. Oh my god, you were the kid from the video. You were super cool. Video? Yeah, hold on. 𝐻𝐸 got out her phone and pulled up the video Kaminari had sent her. He craned his head to watch and started slowly blushing as he watched himself. Geez, that's embarrassing to watch. 𝐻𝐸 giggled at him. But you are super cool, man. Do your best, all right. That was always the plan. Oh man, so wait, hang on, I thought you were good at fighting. What are you doing in a support lab? Hatsume giggled as she responded for him. Broccoli-kun here can't legally have support gear. He was dropping by to get his gear updated and help me out. Whoa, you also use support equipment? Izuku smiled, before walking over to where Pandora was splayed out on May's desk. Yup, Pandora. The one from the Greek myth. Yeah, it's sorta a funny story. Izuku placed a hand on the brace, looking fondly at his partner. If you know Prometheus, after he gave humans fire, the gods punished him, but also sought to punish his brother. Prometheus was running from his fate, but the chains the gods had placed on him dragged him closer and closer to the mountain every day. While running, however, his brother found him and asked if he should help the humans. Prometheus told him that he would only die if he faced the gods. He told him to simply be at their mercy, and they may come to pity him. Devastated by his brother's words, the Titan locked himself away, isolated from the world. The gods didn't like that, and felt the need to take revenge on him regardless of the fact his only sin was being born related to Prometheus. He ran a hand along the silver exterior, so the gods all teamed up on him and built him two things. The first, Pandora, a beautiful woman blessed by Aphrodite herself. Izuku shifted to look roughly where 𝐻𝐸's eyes were. The gods said there was no bad blood, and delivered unto the brother a wife as well as a dowry. A box, one they said never to open. 𝐻𝐸 spoke, realization dawning on her. Ah, Pandora's box. Yup, the brother tried his best to be faithful to his wife, and her to him. However, despite proclaiming there to be no bad blood, the gods continued to taunt and mock the brother. They said he had no place, that he was worthless and meaningless. The brother got frustrated and talked with Pandora. She had no clue what was in there, and they both agreed to open the box together. He let out a sigh. Inside the box contained every misery humanity would ever face: war, hate, discrimination, betrayal, etc. Each was unleashed unto the humans. The guilt and horror that Pandora witnessed was enough of a shock to end her life on the spot. The brother, however, remained long enough to see the final concept in Pandora's box: hope. Within the chaos, within the immense and overwhelming cruelty of the world, hope still existed, and was in fact formed from it. Wow, that's heavy. Yeah, it is. We honestly just chose the name because we started losing track of the features inside of it. But I still like that concept. Hope derived from horror. 𝐬𝐻 realized at that moment that the boy in front of her had not had a good life. It was obvious thinking about it. It just hadn't registered to her. As someone quirkless, he'd have faced horrible discrimination just because of it. Though it was invisible, she clenched her fist. I think so too. No matter how bad something is, there's always something good that can come from it. He gave her a dry smile. Yeah, it's nice to think that. Izuku rubbed some soot from his clothes as he held onto a handrail on a train. He was looking out of the window with headphones in, though nothing was playing. A trick eraser had taught him for remaining inconspicuous. He had several reasons for doing so. The first thing to set him off was that despite it being the afternoon, right as schools and certain jobs ended, he was almost entirely alone in the cabin, save two other people, both still teens but definitely older than him. One had sharp yellow hair and had his fingers twitching constantly. He was scrawny and obviously looking for someone. His constantly darting eyes showed that pretty easily. The way they had locked onto Izuku's hair was also quite foreboding. The second was significantly calmer. He had thick curly blue hair that covered his eyes, and was wearing stylish fashion. His fingers each had hinges attached to them, probably for shooting something out of them. A small noise that easily could have been ignored had he actually been listening to music sounded out. He was intimately aware of what it was, being the sound of discharging electricity. Yellow hair had wide eyes and had just covered his hands. So, two people. One was clearly wealthy, the other nervous. A first-time member and an experienced one was a common setup for criminal missions. Their goal was obvious. They'd probably wait until he was walking out of the train, so they would have a less public area to kill him. Izuku pulled up his phone and started messing with it. His posture was relaxed, another one of Eraser's trainings, though his annoyingly honest heart was starting to make its presence known. He held it in front of his face and pretended to be scrolling, while he actually took pictures of both of the men. He pocketed his phone once more and contented himself with watching them through the reflection in the mirror. He also idly flicked Pandora on. He was starting to wear it almost excessively. The thing had obviously already gotten all of his natural movements and paces down. But he kept wearing it even when he really didn't have to. At this point, the only time he was without it was when he was showering or taking a bath. The paranoia had proven to be the correct decision in this regard, though. He pondered how best to do this. He should obviously make the first attack, get the jump on them, but that would require that he was not just being incredibly paranoid and beating up civilians, and be confident he could win. He still lacked experience, Pandora especially. Thinking about things logically, it was incredibly experienced in hand-to-hand combat, knew to isolate two strong lights and defend against Eraser's cloth. But that was it. He should try to lose them once off the train. He pulled his phone back up as if checking a text and instead opened May's app for applying information directly to Pandora. He provided basic profiles for both men, along with the theorized electricity quirk from one man and the probable projectile quirk of the other one. The machine sent back a response in simplistic text. Understood. Do you trust me? Izuku raised an eyebrow. Of course, partner. Izuku was no fool. He'd gotten this far thanks significantly to Pandora. It was a reliance he was starting to worry about. He still needed more time to be useful in a fight on his own. Pulling double shifts learning from Eraserhead and Shiketsu was having his skill rapidly improve. But even in just sheer body weight he was lacking. But regardless, it may be clumsy at times, but so was he. He'd put his life in Pandora's hands. He almost chuckled at the notion. Putting trust in chaos. The support equipment felt even more suited to its name after Izuku had remembered the story behind it while talking to 𝐬𝐻. His life had been shit. He could admit that freely. He'd been beaten, pushed, forced to do work for others and demeaned all the while. But from that misery, he had found May, then Eraserhead, then Flashbang, 𝐀𝐦 𝐍𝐴 and even the principal. In some ways, Pandora represented the hope he had found for acceptance. That he didn't actually have to face the world alone. That idea was held on his arms and protected him in his times of need. Izuku's peaceful pondering was halted alongside the train. It was his stop. He walked casually, no difference in his gait as he observed the two following him. They were keeping their distance, but were clearly still on him. He took a few steps down the station steps, then turned to face them. He needed confirmation that they were actually out to get him. He gave the two men a smirk, then took off running. He heard one of the men yell out, "Shit," after him, and the two took off after him. All right, so he wasn't going crazy, that's, well, he'd like to say good. But he turned a sharp corner as something shot out at him. He wasn't able to see it, but Pandora probably could. He spoke as he ran down the alley he had turned into. "What are we looking at, partner?" The alley was a dead end, save for a fire escape. Izuku felt like he was using them too often at this point. Would every critical point in his life involve a fire escape? An androgynous synthetic voice he had heard in testing responded. "Highly pressurized water, your third guess was accurate. First had been missiles, second was darts." He had 15 total plugged into the eye after he started theorizing. Activating water defense protocol, avoidance. Pressurized water would carve through his equipment if it was fast enough. He needed to dodge it before anything. He kicked off the wall and grabbed the final rung of the ladder with one hand, before gripping it fully and pulling himself up, or trying to. As a shot of water came near him and Pandora grabbed and pulled him back, allowing him to avoid the stream that carved clean through the metal ladder and land softly, but still in a 1 versus 2 situation. He was also backed into a corner. That was actually not too bad given it was a fight where he was outnumbered. The wall to his back would cut off a lane of attack for the two. The yellow-haired man cracked his knuckles as the two stood at the entrance of the alley. "You shameless piece of shit. You really thought you were slick." The blue-haired man didn't speak. He just extended his hands once more. Izuku couldn't track his eyes thanks to his hair, and settled for allowing Pandora to dodge, which it did. Izuku's eyes narrowed as he saw the man's process once more. He could only keep the water on for a temporary burst from the looks of things, and he had a water bottle in his pocket, implying that his quirk may dehydrate him. The yellow-haired one spoke again. "Hold tight, senpai. I can handle this useless thing." The blue-haired man held out a hand, as if attempting to stop him, but the younger of the two ran out directly at Izuku. His hand was crackling with electricity, but only his hand. The man approached with an obvious swipe, and Izuku backed up. Pandora was dormant, as it lacked the ability to nullify electrical attacks. The yellow-haired man growled and swiped again, a move telegraphed enough that Izuku could grab the man's arm. He pulled the man closer to him and delivered a knee to the man's chest. The man coughed and failed to take advantage of the enclosed area. Izuku dropped his grip and backed up. The man clutched his chest and gritted his teeth, and he stood wobbling. In terms of positioning, Izuku wanted to keep the man right where he was, which is to say, in the line of fire for his friend, whose hand was outstretched, looking for a moment to let loose an attack. He saw the man frown from under his curls and start walking forward. The yellow-haired man collected himself and lashed out once more. Izuku kept his distance as the wobbly man crashed into the walls to his side, his electrified hand touching nothing but concrete. Izuku turned as Pandora triggered. Darts with strings attached to them shot into the wall, pulling him towards it to avoid a stream of water. His back pressed into the wall as he tracked the yellow-haired man's movements. The yellow-haired man smirked as he touched the wall, and arcs of electricity ignored physics as they shot out from the man's hand, rushing straight towards Izuku. Pandora was fast, Izuku was too, but neither was faster than electricity. A scream escaped his lips as the electricity flooded into Izuku's back like 1,000 daggers stabbing through his chest. Izuku's back arched involuntarily, and he pushed himself off the wall in a second, stumbling slightly as he did. The yellow-haired man laughed, before he started coughing again, still winded from Izuku's attack. Pandora had also been affected by the shot. He and May had implemented counters to electric attacks, but only to the extent of it not being fully destroyed. It was probably inactive. He dodged manually as he saw fingertips, and a stream of water left a cut in the building's exterior. The blue-haired man started advancing calmly, keeping Izuku at a distance with a burst of water-based attacks. The man walked forward until he was next to the electric-quirked man. The man was still leaning on the wall for support. He spoke while breathing heavily. "That bastard really fucking hurts." The blue-haired boy looked at him, before uncapping his water bottle and drinking. Izuku charged forward, shoes pounding on concrete as he tried to reach the man. The electric one moved forward as well, crossing his arms over his body in a sloppy defensive guard. Izuku slammed his fist into the man's guard over his chest. Then he pivoted his foot and spun as his leg slammed into the man's head. The attack landed and his shoe slammed into the man's temple with the ferocity of a predator killing its prey with one bite. The man, lacking headgear, dropped with the one landed attack. Truth was, if you knew where to hit, knocking someone out was easy. Problem was, fights are chaotic and become mostly instinct at some point. Keeping logical thinking in the midst of a brawl was one of the main things Eraserhead was trying to drive home. The man had given him time to think, and so he dropped. The water-quirked man capped the empty bottle and threw it on the ground. He curled his fingers like claws, the hinges swinging open to reveal nozzles. As he swiped out in an X motion, 10 diagonal strands of high-pressure water shot out in an impossible-to-dodge arc. Unable to find a response, Izuku jumped back uselessly as the X hit him directly in the chest. Some strands hit his arms, some his legs. He spiraled backward, his body rolling as the water pushed him back instead of lacerating his body into several parts. He had still gotten really hurt by that. He could feel his shirt and shorts start to soak with blood as the streams had left deep cuts. Izuku held his chest as he struggled to his feet. Blood dropped onto the concrete next to him from the cut on his arms and legs, a small puddle already having formed just from the time it took to stand. The blue-haired man was walking to him. He stood right before Izuku, the closest they'd been the whole fight. Izuku lashed out with a sloppy punch that the man dodged with a simple back step. Izuku lashed out again and the man moved his head easily. The feeling of lost blood forced Izuku onto one knee. The teen stared down at him imperiously. His deep dark blue eyes finally shone. People often say blue eyes look like the sea. His looked like the deep sea, so blue and dark they were almost black. The last thing Izuku saw before he blacked out was the man perfectly recreating the kick he had used against the electrically quirked man. 𝗵𝗃 looked down at the quirkless kid as he pulled his emergency supply of water out of his coat pocket. He was glad he had been sent with the twitchy boy. The man may not have been the strongest, but if he hadn't short-circuited the machine they probably would have lost. He looked at his unconscious understudy, then to the boy he had fought. Between the two of them, the quirkless one was better. He'd rather be training that one. To be fair, the electric boy would be much better off if the teachers would work with them on martial arts instead of just quirk training. 𝗵𝗃 held his hand to his ear and triggered an earpiece. A voice came through. "Ripstream, do you have the target?" He didn't know why they would ask him verbally. They should know by now. He just held down the connection button. We'll just send the van." He cut the connection. 𝗵𝗃 looked at the boy once more. Turning his body over, he opened the boy's shirt, which had the word Kevlar vest on it. The boy had awful taste. If they ever met and he wasn't under orders to kidnap the boy, he'd have to take him shopping. It was a funny thought, one that'd make all the executives gag in disgust. He used a small stream angled so it wouldn't hit the boy and ripped his shirt fully open, more so than his ex-attack hat. He pulled a first aid kit out of the other emergency pocket in his jacket. He was familiar with treating the wounds he inflicted. It was part of why he was trusted as the kidnapper, alongside, what was his name again? Shock. Something. He didn't really care. He stitched the open gashes closed. He sorta wished he had lost. The boy was wild, but didn't really deserve this. He saw something on the boy's arm, jumping back for a second, before calming as he realized it wasn't harmful. The boy's brace, the one that had protected him, was moving. It was repairing itself. He had noticed the sparks coming from a miniature welder inside the gauntlets. He closed the openings to the devices, covering the machine's repair from view, and took off his overcoat, throwing it to cover the boy, disguising both his wounds and his gauntlets. It might change nothing. It might change everything. A van pulled up and 𝗵𝗃 stretched. He was still somewhat dehydrated. He pantomimed drinking and a figure threw a water bottle at him while they walked out of their car. He caught it easily. The woman was a figure made of water despite her solidity as she walked. Her overwhelmingly monochrome skin color made it hard to tell where her eyes were, so she wore glasses to indicate them. She ruffled his hair as he drank. Despite being made of liquid, his hair was dry when she removed her hand. "Good job, 𝗵𝗃." She noticed the blood and poor state of the boy. "Oh, did you kill him?" She spoke with no remorse or empathy for the kid. 𝗵𝗃 shook his head. She smiled once more at him. "Good work. Mom is so happy with you." He glanced at the boy. His caretaker picked up on it. "Oh, are you curious?" He nodded his head. "You don't have to worry about things like him. It's just like how cattle die and become meat. He'll die and become no longer able to spread his worthless genes." She spoke cheerily. It unnerved him. But this cattle was especially bad. He ran his fence and went where he wasn't supposed to. So we have to butcher him in front of the others. 𝗵𝗃 turned to his arm. He pulled his sleeve down and typed into a device he had on his arm. It spoke while he typed. He was strong. The figure's water-based skin developed an eyebrow just so she could raise it in confusion. 𝗵𝗃 pointed to Shock. Something, then typed once more. He beat the electric one easily. And that was after his equipment was immobilized. "If I didn't carry my extra water, his typing was cut off as water rushed up his arms and held them in place." He looked up to his caretaker. She spoke after a moment. One of her arms desolidified to have snaked around his. "Honey, he was weak, pathetic, and wasn't worth your time." 𝗵𝗃 frowned, then shook his head, his typing restricted. His caretaker sighed, then tilted her head and held it with one of her hands. "Oh dear, if my baby boy is struggling with someone who's quirkless of all things, he must need much more training. We'll talk about this more at home." 𝗵𝗃 sighed, the only real verbal noise he ever made. He hefted the injured boy on his back and started carrying him. His caretaker's form shifted, and the legs she had been walking on turned into a wave which picked up the electric boy as they moved. They got into the van, and an inconspicuous man drove them. After a few minutes of driving, the shock man came to, rubbing his head with a groan. Rito opened his nozzle and concentrated. It took lots of effort, but instead of water, a few thin ice blocks fell out of them. He placed them in a baggie and handed it to the younger boy. "Thanks, senpai." The boy took it with grace and put it on his forehead. He chirped up seeing the water-based figure. "Ah, Asu-san, I think I need more training." She chuckled. "Indeed. Both of you will be pulling double time at the dojo after this. But for your first assignment, you did very good, shock bolt." "Thanks, Asu-san." "Oh, but why's senpai getting dojo duty as well?" "He let you get knocked out, so he requested it himself." The boy got teary-eyed as he looked at Rito, who let out another sigh. He spoke reverentially. "You're so cool, senpai." Izuku came back to consciousness as a significant quantity of water was splashed onto his head. He gasped as he did so, the unexpected coldness forcing an involuntary shake. The water weighed his curly hair down until it was covering his eyes, the droplets from the extended strands falling onto his legs. He felt the cold steel of a chair under him, and couldn't move his hands. They were tied with rope, though it was done loosely, and his legs were left free. They were underestimating him. He breathed sharply in and out as he collected himself. He shook his head to get his hair out of his way, and managed to see the situation. He was in an enclosed room, the only light source being an old-fashioned light bulb directly above his head. A camera was watching him on a small stand, and the electric quirk kid was sitting down on a chair next to his with a smirk on his face. His face was covered by a blotchy black mask. The water kid he considered an actual threat was nowhere to be found. He could feel pain where he was slashed, but it wasn't fatal. His shirt was torn and tattered, revealing his new stitches. They'd fixed him up to a degree at least. The large X on his chest remained prevalent, and was definitely going to scar. One other figure was fixing the camera. He was wearing a similar mask and was on the larger side of things. Not muscular, he just had a large stature. His hands also had claws on them. Izuku didn't speak, just watching for a moment as the man finished setting up the camera. He spoke with a hearty laugh. "And we're live." He swung around in an instant, his claws inches from Izuku's face. He didn't flinch. I really like those eyes. I might take them for myself." Izuku didn't talk. His eyes simply narrowed. He'd never gone over being tortured, not by Aizawa nor Shiketsu. He wasn't sure what he was to do. He was, however, taught how to slip out of ropes, and the ones they had him in were pathetically easy. Small problem though, Izuku felt like absolute shit. The electric kid would be easy. Claws might be harder. Together in his state, it'd be impossible. A noise drew his attention as the clawed man turned back to the camera. Pandora was in the room with him, resting on a few out-of-the-way boxes. It had made a small clunking noise the other two had ignored. It was active, probably running the self-repair protocol. It should be able to protect him from a distance, but it'd take until the machine fixed itself fully. He recalled the question it had asked him before deactivating. Did he trust it? Izuku took a deep breath. This was going to hurt. The man was talking to the camera, a history lesson for context. He was talking about the old revolutionary named 𝐬𝐸. The yellow-haired boy was looking dead at the man, his eyes wide and reverential. It was sickeningly close to a devout man watching a preacher. And the man was a preacher. He spoke of revelation, of rapture, and of God's chosen few, or many now. His tone reached a fever pitch as he continued, before he finally reached a conclusion. "And so welcome us back into the world. Welcome God's chosen soldiers who shall enact his holy will. Welcome those who shall look upon those who are defective and devoid of his light, and enact our justice. Welcome, the Meta Liberation Army." The man took a deep breath before he started stalking over to Izuku's bound form. "And for our first act, we shall act as the sea in the sky in the story of Ikaras, as some inferior being has flown far, far too close to the sun on his wax wings." The man drew his claws across Izuku's exposed chest, barely missing his stitches, "and shall soon plunge into the ceaseless ocean." Izuku tilted his head, ignoring his pain. "You were doing so well with the biblical angle. Why start with Greek?" The man's claw rested lightly on Izuku's unflinching face, before dragging slowly down. It wasn't that painful, and left surface scratches that wouldn't even scar. Despite that, Izuku could feel blood start running down his face. Izuku thought for a second, then spoke, referencing the Bible. "He anoints my head with oil." The man continued for him. "My cup overflows." The man looked at him appreciatively. To realize the nature of my actions so quickly, the Lord has blessed us with a true demon to purify." The preacher turned to the yellow-haired boy, then nodded. The boy pressed a hand to Izuku's side, before activating his quirk. Izuku's body moved without him, trying to create distance from the shock as his muscles contracted and expanded without warning nor the desire to do so. A shout escaped his lips. He felt a burn on his wrists from how hard he had pulled against them without thinking. The preacher laughed. "And so the silent finally sings." The preacher was going to get a serious punching if. When Izuku got out of this chair, What shall I take first? A finger, a toe, so many options. Izuku bit back a gulp as the man looked to be drawing lines on Izuku's body with his eye. He found a place to rest once more. The man's claws were placed so Izuku's eye was just between two of them. Emeralds, to welcome our arrival to this world once more. The man started laughing, and his claws started to press, blood being drawn once more. A hiss came from Izuku's mouth as the claws left bloody marks down his face once more. They pressed even harder as they turned, approaching his eyes. A very loud clunk was heard, and everyone in the room except Izuku turned to face it, the preacher taking his hand off of Izuku's face. Izuku spoke, his tone dry and bored, betraying none of his pain. You were wrong about me. My wings aren't wax. They're metal. The man lashed out with his claw, in an attempt to immediately sever Izuku's throat. A metal half-shield intercepted it, its mechanical arm stretched to the absolute limit to reach. Izuku slipped out of his ropes with just a few tugs in the right places. He rubbed his wrists while both parts of Pandora wrapped a wire around his arms and pulled itself back onto him. Also, you all are far too dim to be a sun, and far too shallow to be a sea. He gave a cocky smirk from his seated position as he looked at the preacher. You're nothing but an anglerfish in a puddle. The electric kid lashed out at him, his palms crackling with light and energy, but he hadn't gotten any different, and Izuku could beat him before with ease. He ducked out of the way, rolling out of the chair while the kid kept moving, crashing into and over it. Izuku's body almost literally screamed in protest, his stitches pulling at his skin and muscles aching. Metal clashed with metal as the man met Pandora. The man was locked against the metal shield as both claws pushed down at his defense system. Izuku took the opportunity to land an uppercut as he got to his feet. The man gasped at the impact, and Izuku followed it with a spinning kick, pushing the man off of Pandora in time for it to stab an anchor into the ground and pull Izuku out of the way of the electric kid's attack. The man crashed into the camera stand, and Izuku faced the electric kid as he started swiping wildly again. It was predictable. The kid had no idea what to do in a fight. Izuku once again timed his movements at a vulnerable point between the swings, and grabbed the teen's arm, avoiding his palm as he threw him onto the ground. The boy started pulling himself to his feet but was interrupted as Izuku landed a kick on the boy's head, pushing him back down. His head slammed into the floor with a thump. The preacher launched himself at Izuku, his claws beginning to grow a red color, steaming as the blood that had coated them evaporated. Izuku was glad to be learning about that from the fight and not the torture. Pandora met them, but the heat began to transfer, and Izuku pulled it back with a tug at the robot arm holding the shields. The man was scowling, his features alight with rage as he charged straight at Izuku like a rampaging bear. Izuku fixed his posture to a proper stance, ignoring the protests of his stitches and muscles. The man swiped right, and Izuku leaned back. He swiped left, and Izuku ducked his head. The man swung with both arms in a clawed bear hug, and Izuku stepped forwards, gripping the man by his collar and his sleeve. He pressed himself forward and pivoted, turning himself so his back pushed into the man's chest, then used the momentum of the turn and the man's previous forward momentum to throw him over Izuku's back, straight into the electric kid, though the pressure on his back from the man was only there for a moment. He heard an audible snap as at least one of his stitches tore. Not great. The two fell onto each other in a heap. Izuku dearly wished he had an offensive weapon at this moment, as he lacked a way to capitalize. Though, Eraser had always told him to use his surroundings. The man stood up and faced him. His eyes met Izuku's, the boy holding the metal chair he had been tied to high above his blood-soaked face. His mouth curled to a demonic grin as the preacher's eyes widened, but was too slow to react as the chair impacted his head. The impact sent him to the ground once more. The electric kid also tried to stand. He covered his face with his arms, but it wasn't really too great of a help as the chair slammed into them anyway, forcing the kid to stumble to the side, and Izuku sent him back down with a kick to the chest. He tried to scramble back up but was met with a full-force chair. Izuku couldn't help but admire the now dented chair. Sometimes simplicity was best. Izuku looked down at the groaning preacher. Here's a favorite from that Bible of yours. Iron sharpens iron, as man sharpens man. He slammed the chair into the downed form of the man. I think you've sharpened my edge rather beautifully. Care to test it? The man swung with his claws from the floor, but Izuku dodged back, keeping his weapon out of reach. The man awkwardly tried to stand before being brought down with a forward kick to the head. The electric kid had managed to find his footing, and threw a desperate punch at Izuku, who dodged with ease by simply tilting his head back. The kid wasn't aiming for Izuku, however, and was instead trying to grab his metal chair. Izuku chucked it into the air easily, causing the boy to grab nothing but air and unbalancing himself. Izuku capitalized and kicked the boy's leg, forcing his momentum to a halt as he fell to a knee. Izuku caught the chair and slammed it into his head in the same motion. Yeah, that kid wasn't waking up for a while. The preacher coughed as he struggled to stand, clearly unused to fighting. As one of God's chosen ones, I shall not. Izuku slammed the chair into him. Sorry, but I'm done listening to people who think they know better than me. The man was unconscious. Given the amount of force a steel chair could impart on a human skull, both people would probably be nursing concussions for a while. Considering they had tried to kill him, Izuku didn't particularly mind. Izuku regulated his breathing and felt the adrenaline wash back as he just took a moment to rest. He was met with an onslaught of pain and aches as he calmed down, his injuries finally catching up with him. He couldn't tell if he was in still waters or the eye of the hurricane. He took a final deep breath and got back to work. Izuku took in the room once more, this time from his freed position. It had several random boxes and what looked like fabric inside of it. He couldn't be sure where he was, but it was probably some kind of store or company. The man had said he was a member of the Metal Liberation Army, which would be similar to Americans redeclaring themselves Confederates. It was ludicrous. A few things rubbed Izuku the wrong way. For one, there were more people. Water Kid was nowhere to be found, and the man had emphasized the word we. He very well may be in the middle of enemy territory. Izuku checked the box Pandora had been left on, grabbing his phone which was also on it, and opening it to reveal more fabric. He took the fabric and wiped the blood off of his face. It stung lightly as he did so, and he ignored the sensation. Speaking of blood though, he was losing a lot. He pulled on a segment of Pandora, and a small section was pushed out which contained a full med kit. He spent a few minutes reapplying stitches and disinfectant while considering his next move. He stole the Electric Kid's shirt as he thought, covering himself with at least something. The first thing he did was tie the two figures up with the ropes he had on him. It was difficult to position the two in a way the man couldn't simply cut them. By the time he was done though, he was happy with the result. The next thing he checked was the camera, which was still running. He stopped and considered popping out the SD card. This was about as incriminating as evidence could get, and he sure as hell would be putting these guys on some sort of wanted list. He thought for a second, then resumed filming, grabbing the camera and removing the masks of the two, making sure to get long shots of their faces, before then stopping it and removing the SD card. There was one exit clearly visible, and it was a simple door that led out of the room. Izuku thought for a second, then checked his phone to see if it could use GPS. It had been short-circuited by the attack that had hit his back way back in the alley fight. In short, Izuku was screwed. He was seriously not in fighting condition, and had no clue what was behind that door. He peeked through the keyhole, and it revealed nothing. He'd be walking into some kind of corridor, but that still had no clear indication of a window or escape. He took a deep breath, then opened it, walking out. The door clicked behind him. He focused his ears and heard nothing. He was presented with a very simple choice, left or right, feeling the need to move regardless. He started walking. He chose the right. He held onto the wall to keep himself upright. Adrenaline gone, the pain had returned full force as Izuku limped his way forward. The stitches and bandages were the only things keeping him from leaving a trail of blood as he moved. He turned a corner and ducked back behind it as he saw the Water Kid. He peeked out and saw the boy. He noticed the kid had taken off the jacket, but was still wearing the rest of his stylish outfit. He had headphones, and as he walked in the opposite direction of Izuku, Izuku took some calming breaths and crouched, taking small steps as he silently approached the boy. His stitches didn't like his posture, but Izuku was getting much better at ignoring them. He walked forward slowly, the kid walking away from him. They crossed a fair length of corridor, and Izuku was inching closer before the kid suddenly turned and saw him. Izuku charged forward without hesitation, desperate to close the distance between them. He lashed out with a punch. The kid reacted quickly, leaning back to dodge the punch and stepping lightly back to avoid Izuku's charge. Izuku kept the blows going, but failed to connect any of them, before eventually his own exhaustion and injuries had him crashing into one of the corridor walls, gasping for air. He spoke between breaths. He no longer had the will to continue. He felt the same as he had so long ago on that roof. He just wanted it to end. Just fucking kill me already. The boy looked at him for a moment, before typing something into a machine on his wrist. A synthetic voice not far removed from Pandora's trial once spoke out. You won't change anything believing that. What are you fighting for? Who are you fighting for? What about the world do you so desperately want to change? I had thought you better than to give up. He thought about that. What? Well, to prove the world wrong and show he could be a hero. Who was he fighting for? The answer came to him instantly, and he could smell the motor oil and see the pink dreadlocks. He fought for May, to prove her invention's worth and to work with her. What did he want to change? He wanted to live in a world where he could be a hero, where once a spark had been snuffed out in his eyes, a wildfire now burned. Fuck all of you. Izuku made a mental choice, stubbornly. He decided that against all odds, he wouldn't die here. Izuku stomped a foot forward, pushing forward with his punch. The kid met him head-on, blocking the blow with his arms. Izuku took another step forward and grabbed the boy's arm, tugging it forward as he slammed his own head into the boy's, staggering them both back. Izuku's breathing was haggard. His lungs couldn't get enough air despite the massive gasping intakes he pushed out of his steadily deteriorating body. Izuku had felt this once mentally, and now physically, his body was fighting a losing battle. It was fine. He wouldn't die here. The water kid was now audibly breathing as well, his finger caps still unopened as he entertained the quirkless brawl. He remained, however, firmly on the defensive, not taking a single step towards Izuku and simply holding his position. Izuku took another step forward. He used a burst of energy to spin, his foot lashing out like a thrusting spear. The kid sidestepped it easily, gripping his calf before pulling him forward and slamming his head into Izuku's in an imitation of his previous move. They both fell back to their neutral stances once more. The worst part of the situation was that Izuku could tell the kid had no formal training. His dodges and strikes all seemed purely instinctual, but he was learning fast. His guarding stance was now a mirror image of Izuku's own, his hands both held so his closed fists revealed the slightest hints of his eyes, enough to protect them and still see through them. The kid spun and unleashed a spinning kick in the same vein as Izuku's. Pandora met it, stopping it for a moment, before a stream of high-powered water cut the robotic arm off. Still, the momentum had been stopped, and the kid was unbalanced. Izuku dive-tackled the boy, gripping onto his chest as he brought them to the ground. The kid rolled with his momentum and shot a leg up, pushing Izuku's chest with his foot and throwing the boy off of him. Izuku spun in the air and caught himself in a crouch before rising to stand once more, the kid doing the same. Izuku focused once more, but it was interrupted by the sound of footsteps rushing in their direction. Izuku's eyes widened, and the kid turned slightly, before running a hand over his face and pulling curls back so Izuku could see his face. He hadn't noticed it during the ally fight, but the kid had a seriously large scar running a jagged lightning bolt shape down from his forehead to the bridge of his nose. The teen took his other hand and tapped 2 fingers against the side of his forehead. One of the spots Eraser had taught him to knock someone out. He then made the universal come-at-me gesture, his arms dropping out of a guarding position. Izuku felt a moment of hesitation. This was almost definitely a trap. He looked into the kid's deep blue eyes. They looked back with no clear emotion held within them. The murky waters within them stared back. Akin more to the void Izuku felt himself looking into back on that roof than anything human. Izuku charged forward and slammed his fist into the boy's head. They made eye contact through the movement as the teen stood planted, not wincing, not flinching. Almost indifferent to the blow as Izuku made contact, and the boy dropped to the ground with a thud. A group of people turned the corner and they all saw Izuku. He stood over one of their most promising members. His face held a claw mark, a trademark of their religious leader, and the blood from the wound caked his face, his arms and legs both clearly stitched, and breathing in gasps. He looked like a corpse, still moving and fighting through willpower alone. They looked into his dark eye-bagged eyes and saw a sheer hate looking back. The world seemed to turn jade as his eyes looked indifferently down on them. A few of their men stepped backward unconsciously. The kid looked at them, and his posture shifted, an arm held out towards them, the other held close to his face as his legs crouched slightly. He spoke, his voice surprisingly deep for his age. It reverberated through the enclosed halls in an echo. "I refuse." Izuku stood, his body a pincushion of pain. He could feel each stitch, feel the marks on his face. Feel the soreness of his muscles, feel the faintness in his head from blood loss. He thought about why he fought, why he should keep going, why he shouldn't give up. I refuse to live in this shitty world. He was facing a group that prided themselves on their quirk strength. He was seriously injured. Even if he survived the fight, his stitches would tear and he'd bleed out. His chance of survival at this point was ridiculously low. He would die here, for real. No, he wouldn't. He would massacre this group, then get help outside. He would live. He would live. If he died, May would blame herself. He felt an echo of the cocktail of tormenting emotions he had experienced on that roof. If he died here, May would have to feel those emotions as well. He would live. He took a step towards them, they stepped back. I refuse to live a weak and meaningless life. He took another step, his pain fading as adrenaline rushed into him once more. I refuse to live having people like you look down on me. Another step. I refuse to stand aside and wait for people to help me. He took another step. He was within reach of their frontman now, his quirk a clear mutation that gave him a gun barrel in his chest. So either remove me from this world. He stood probably only a foot away from the man, or watch in terror as I remake it in my image. Because that was what this was all about really. It was his one act of defiance against the world, the rejection of his provided role. He wasn't a helpless fool. He wasn't the naive dreamer who never went anywhere. He was a hero. He was a fucking hero. It didn't matter what anyone else thought. So either accept it, or try to kill him. It didn't matter to him, he would survive. Silence filled the room. No one moved, and no one acted. The moment was only finally broken as the man who had a gun in his chest shouted, and his quirk fired. Izuku sidestepped the predictable attack easily and slammed his fist into the unguarded temple of the man, before spinning and launching a kick which dropped the man in less than a second. He returned to his same stance as before. Who's next? The spell had been broken over the group, and they all charged at once. It was sheer chaos. Pandora was firing constantly. Metal plates, shields, ropes with wires, and metallic arms grabbed, deflected, and rebuffed multiple attacks at a time. All the while Izuku put his full faith in the device, moving forward thoughtlessly. His fists and legs developed the same mechanical detachment from his body that he felt with Pandora. Pandora became his defense, his body his offense, both no more and no less than that. He felt his knuckles ram their way into a chest while Pandora's arm staggered as a fist made of rock slammed into it. His leg clipped a man's chin as a rope wrapped around a man's beaked mouth. His elbow slammed into a woman's temple as a jet of water pushed back a man's focused stream of fire. His hands gripped fabric while he threw someone seemingly made of steel over his shoulder. Pandora blocked a group of ranged attacks. His pain, his thoughts, his autonomy, it all fell like sand through an open palm as he moved endlessly. All that mattered was the person in front of him, then the person after that, then after that. A quirk hit his shoulder, and plant life exploded from it. His shoulder grew bramble and thorns in painful spirals. It didn't matter. His body was no longer his. It wasn't a body. It was a weapon. He moved with single-minded clarity, fighting better and with more technique than he ever had. His fist hit a head. A shield met a sword made of blood. The bramble grew. He kicked. A shield blocked. The bramble grew. He fought. He fought. The bramble encompassed an arm, pinning it down with its growth. He used his other. He fought. He fought. He fought. The world blurred around him. He couldn't see more than the next person to enter his path, his focus blinding him from his pain and from the world around him. He fought. His chest heaved. His mind screamed. He fought. He felt no pain. He fought. He felt nothing but pain. He fought. Izuku's vision blurred. He saw no enemy in front of him, no villain he needed to beat. His feet and legs were numb. His elbows and knuckles both rubbed raw and then some, trickles of blood running warm paths down his skin. He could barely see. Red blood coating his eyes and exhaustion making him incapable of registering what he saw. Pandora was a spider web of metal around him, fractured bits of metal sticking out of the walls, its several mechanical arms sticking around his body, two spikes holding him upright as all the power left his legs. He was taking rapid and uncontrolled breaths. One arm numbly wrapped around his chest, where blood was spilling through broken stitches like water through cupped hands. He tried to put power back into his body, taking a step, and falling, two more spikes stopping him from hitting the ground face first. They lowered him gently to the ground. Izuku rolled over onto his back. His vision was getting worse. He could barely see anything, just blobs of color. He felt his chest keep rising and falling as his lungs took breath at a rate just shy of hyperventilating. His vision started to shift from blobs of color to just black. He numbly felt hands wrap around his shoulders. He thought he saw something with a lot of black and gray looking at him. His eyes closed. He had a single thought as he slipped finally into the abyss. I hope May doesn't mourn me. I'd hate to take time away from her inventing. A great many people watched the leaked CCTV footage of a quirkless child fighting for his life. They had expected it to be brutal, but what they weren't expecting was for the ones being brutalized to have been the attackers. The quirkless child moved like a reaper through the group, much stronger than him, his mechanical arms and legs propelling and defending his form. No one could stand in his vision for long, as he used everything he had to brawl. A boy with spiky blonde hair felt his palms crackle as he saw the desperate movements of a wild beast as they tore through their predators. A man with cyan hair scratched his neck as he saw another victim of a broken society fighting to fix it. A man with conviction in his eyes and steel in his hands grinned as he saw a promising hero debut with no thought for the media covering him. A symbol clutched a red-dyed handkerchief as he saw the feral desperation of someone he had once scorned. A teacher strained his dry eyes, looking for anything he could do to help the boy, even if the fight was already over. Another teacher had tears dripping down his face, rage filling him as he saw his students' pain. An inventor watched with a straight face where there should have been a manic smile, forcing herself to watch as she saw her invention slowly failed her only friend. A kind mother watched crying as her son killed himself for his dream. Millions of others all sat, watching one child's desperate struggle. Watching as the look in his eyes became steel, the area around him became a landfill of unconscious bodies, and as his strength, both mental and physical, bore down on all those around him. Watching as he spat in the face of common notions. Watching as he declared the very idea of him being weak for his birth to be nothing but a myth. Watching as those with quirks strong enough to be heroes faltered against a boy who had no inborn power. No one could mock him. No one could pity him. He had proven to be far above such things. He became idolized by some, demonized by others. Some said his machine had carried him through it. Some said hard work had propelled him. The boy himself thought that he was really sore. Izuku didn't really remember when he woke up, just that he had at some point, and was now resting in a full-body cast at the hospital. He heard the story after a fair degree of waiting. He had, apparently, caused so much of a ruckus that some of the non-culty employees at the support company had called the cops. Eraser had been the one to find him. He didn't care about the video. Fame didn't matter to him. Not really. His goal was set, become a hero and change the world. Everything else was meaningless. Though, if what the nurse had told him was true, that would be a little bit harder now. The bramble in his side had left serious puncture wounds in his arms. He'd have a multitude of small scars there. The claw mark on his face had also surprisingly scarred. It had apparently been deeper than he had thought. If it wasn't for Recovery Girl paying him a surprise visit, ordered by Principal Nezu apparently, he would have had to take a full year off thanks to his stomach stitches having been done, broken, reapplied, then broken again throughout the course of his kidnapping. The police wouldn't let him know what was happening with the case when they took his statement, which he thought was rude, but he wasn't exactly in a place to make demands given his lack of ability to use most of his limbs. He had apparently fractured his wrists in several places due to all of his bare-knuckled punching. Really, his legs had been the only part of him to have not gotten severely harmed in the kidnapping. Knowing himself, though, that probably wouldn't last long. There was a knock at his door, and a few people in Shiketsu uniforms filed in. He saw 𝐀𝐦 𝐍𝐸 and an 𝐴𝐴 who had duct tape over his mouth. Izuku raised an eyebrow, and 𝐀𝐦 spoke as he placed a bouquet on the table next to Izuku. He kept yelling in the hospital, so we shut him up. Some muffled shouts came from the boy, but Izuku couldn't make out anything. 𝐀𝐦 placed a small heart-shaped chocolate box on the stand next to the flowers with a wink. Izuku wasn't sure he could even handle blushing at this point, but he did anyway. "Hey guys, you have the homework I missed out on." 𝐀𝐦 laughed. To be so diligent even when injured. "You truly are a student of Shiketsu." A plastic bag he was holding hit the ground with an audible thump. "And of course I brought it. I'm the class president now after all." "Oh, congrats." Izuku felt odd. He had been in a desperate fight for survival, and now he was just chatting about school. He felt an indescribable sense of unease at the casualness of the situation. He couldn't tell why. The group stood around, chatting with Izuku's injured form until the visitation hours finally ended. His next visitor was an odd woman who introduced herself as a reporter. "Go ahead and call me Tsukuchi." He stared at her in a deadpan manner. "How did you get in here?" "I tracked my brother down and followed him until I found the hospital you're staying in, snuck in, and checked every room until I found you. Honestly, I'd be furious if I had the energy. Now I'm just impressed." She laughed despite him not saying a joke, then held up a pen and notepad. "Are you free for an interview?" Izuku looked at the casts on his arms. "I'm not going anywhere anytime soon." "All right." She cleared her throat. "Now then, how exactly did you end up where you did when that recording saw you?" "Two guys ambushed me out of my usual train route. I fought back, but they managed to short out my equipment with an electrical quirk, then gave me this." He indicated his large X scar. "Next thing I knew, I was tied up in a chair. Took a while, but I broke out, then left. The hall I was in right after was where the fight happened." He paused for a moment before speaking. "There is one thing that rubs me the wrong way about this, though." The reporter had a gleam in her eye. "Oh, the footage." The building was under the control of that organization, probably higher-up members as well, but the footage still got released despite how bad it was for them and their image. "Also, I fought someone else in that same spot, but that fight wasn't included." It was the thing that had been bugging him this whole time. Who had released the footage? And why didn't they include the curly-haired kid giving him a free win? Someone from that organization was making them look as bad as possible, and making Izuku look as good as possible. It didn't make sense. The reporter just shrugged her shoulders. "That's for people like my brother to figure out." Now, then the second question. "What were you feeling whilst in that brawl?" "Nothing, honestly. I was just moving." Everything sort of faded into the background. "I knew, or refused to acknowledge, that I would probably die regardless. I mean, I was facing a large group, injured, and soon to tear my stitches. It didn't matter if I beat them. I'd have died bleeding on the floor right after. Those didn't look like the moves of someone accepting his death." I said I was refusing to acknowledge it. Like a kid stubbornly declaring something that just wasn't true. I refused to believe I would die. Worked out, I guess. Well, I was also just plain angry. I mean, I've tried really fucking hard to get here. To die because some prejudiced assholes got the jump on me. I wanted to burn it into each of their minds that I could be a hero before I went down. That what they had robbed the world of was someone who could be what they set their mind to do. The reporter wrote it all down word for word with a massive grin. Izuku spoke suddenly, remembering something. "Oh, right. If you're releasing this, I have one request." "What's that?" "Make sure to include the person who made my equipment. Hatsume, self-proclaimed future CEO of Hatsume Industries, current member of UA's support equipment class, first year, like me." The reporter's eyes widened. "That was made by a student. I honestly thought that was some reclusive master craftsman's final creation. You have a very vivid imagination. Comes with the territory. Anyway, what drives your dedication to becoming a hero? I mean, it doesn't exactly seem to have as many of the upsides people typically go for with you." Izuku paused for a second. That reporter had just implied most people attempted heroism for fame. How odd. Not inaccurate, just odd. It's been my dream for as long as I've known the word. Of course, originally it was just the desire to help people, but it's become a bit more than that. I had asked a high-ranking hero if they thought I could become a hero. They said no. That must have been rough. Yeah, it was. I started thinking about the world, and I decided the only world I wanted to live in was one where I could be a hero. So I didn't listen to them, and I kept moving. Neat. All right. Last question. A few people are asking if you'll be retiring prematurely due to how much damage has already been inflicted on you at such a young age. Will you be giving up anytime soon? So long as I have wings to fly on, I will soar. Poetic. I try. The girl stood, then stretched as she pocketed the notepad. Alrighty. I'm going to bolt before a nurse finds out I snuck in. Rest well. She gave a soft, genuine smile. Kids like you should get some rest, alright. She gave a small wave as she left. What an odd person. The principal was the next to visit Izuku. Her sleek uniform lacked even a single crease as she sat down in the chair next to him. She regarded him with cold eyes as he sat there. He broke the silence after a while. I'm getting expelled. Her expression didn't change, and she refrained from speaking. You mentioned that if I got to beat up from outside sources I'd get expelled. She had a deep intake of breath before she finally spoke. Yes, I did say that. Izuku felt an overwhelming exhaustion overtake him once more. He had He had been getting better. He was getting closer. He was almost a hero, just for it to be ripped away right as he believed he would truly get there. The situation changed. Her words cut through his thoughts like a knife through butter. The reason for that rule was because we believed you'd be attacked. We didn't expect it to be to this degree, nor for you to be so adept at escaping the attacks. Frankly, what you've done has proved your place in this school. A small smile met her lips as she regarded him. Izuku Midoriya, you are truly and fully welcomed as a student of Shiketsu. From now on, there will be no more talks of unprecedented expulsion. We will also be providing you several things to ensure such a situation doesn't occur once more. He really needed to stop crying so easily. Izuku felt the crutch under his armpit as he hobbled forward. He cursed under his breath with each step as he moved, the soreness of his muscles still raw and piercing. Recovery Girl was a miracle worker, and he hadn't needed his casts to stay on longer than a week, but still had issues walking without limping thanks to the pain in his chest and the lacerations on his legs. He felt the cold night air on his skin as he walked. An escort had dropped him off nearby, but he had insisted he walk himself the last block. He walked up to the front door of May's house and rang the doorbell. May's father opened the door. He let out a relieved sigh as he saw Izuku. He spoke as he helped Izuku inside. Thank you so much for coming. We've seen her have bursts of energy before, but this is just not safe for anyone. Izuku nodded and made his way through the house. May's house was typically a hive of activity and invention, devices constantly firing, appliances with far too many extra features making themselves known, an endless white noise machine. As he walked the halls now, none of that was heard. The only source of noise was from the garage, where frantic noises of metal on metal resonated out. With the ferocity and frequency of the clangs, it almost sounded like a sword fight was occurring just beyond the door to the garage. He walked through the door, it clicking behind him as he saw the familiar scene of May's garage. Her eyes locked onto him, then turned quickly away. Her eyes had bags as deep as his. Her hair was disheveled, strands fraying everywhere. She coughed as she spoke. Vegetable Kun, I was just working on some things for you. Izuku hobbled forward, speaking, his tone serious. May, it's my new baby, well, you weren't here for it, such an absentee father. He spoke again. May, she kept her back turned to him as she rifled through a box of machinery. It still needs a few parts, but hey, what doesn't need some revision, right? He placed a hand on her shoulder. May, she looked him in the eye, for the first time since he had visited. Izuku, May, it wasn't your fault. Her eyes widened, and tears started welling in them. He repeated himself. It wasn't your fault. Her body hunched in on itself, her form tense with frustration and her fists clenched into balls at her side. She spoke with an uncharacteristic crack in her voice, a wavering tone from someone who had never hesitated. I thought you were going to die. She rubbed a tear from her eyes with a gloved hand. I thought Pandora failed. I thought I failed. He gave her a small smile. You were the reason I survived. She shook her head, a sad expression on her face. Pandora wasn't strong enough to keep you from getting kidnapped. You shouldn't have even been in that situation, May. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, feeling the warmth of her body against his. Not Pandora, you. The thing that kept me going back there was the knowledge that you were waiting for me. That death would mean an awful memory of inventing for you. That you'd do something like this. A choked noise came from her throat, and the dam broke. Sobs started to escape her lips as her shoulders shook. She was fully crying now, her sobs ringing out where clanging metal had once. Izuku spoke soothingly, placing one hand on the back of her head. May, I'm right here. I'm with you, you didn't lose anyone. She gripped his shirt and dug her head into his chest. He withstood the desire to grunt in pain as she did so. He just kept his arms around her and kept reminding her that he was all right. He hadn't gone anywhere. He wasn't gone. He was there with her. She gripped him tightly, holding onto him as if he would slip between her fingers at any point. After a few minutes, she tired out. She had been inventing for 3 straight days according to her father, so it wasn't too much of a surprise that she passed right out, sleeping on his lap as he sat with his back against her workbench. The door to the garage opened with a click, and Izuku turned to see her father walk in with 2 mugs in his hands. He walked up to Izuku and placed one in his hands. Izuku took it with a mumbled thanks, sipping it to be met with the taste of hot chocolate. The older man sat down next to them, and Izuku got a good look at him for the first time. He was on the shorter side of things, and scrawny as well, but his eyes held a strong sense of strength in them. Where May's mom had the family's trademark manic smile, the patriarch of the family had a more subdued and kind smile permanently affixed to his face. He had a strange salt and pepper consistency to his hair, though it was between a dull and bright pink color. He took a deep sip of his drink and looked at Izuku. "Thanks, just for everything." He nodded his head to his daughter. We're all familiar with what it's like to be outsiders. In life, there's this idea that to have worth, you need to fit in. No one with Hatsume as a last name ever fits in, and so we get used to being alone. Her mother and I didn't meet until college, and we were both totally alone until then. Of course, most of that is by choice. I mean, parties would take away from inventing time after all. He chuckled softly. Izuku wanted to participate in the conversation, but his exhaustion was catching up with him, and he could feel himself start to wane. The man kept speaking, his calm and quiet voice not helping Izuku stay awake at all. So, it was a huge relief to see her dragging you around, and to see you willingly keep coming back. But once you finally find someone you click with, after being alone for so long, that feeling of companionship is addicting. Her mother and I were attached at the hip throughout most of college. May thought she lost that forever. Izuku took a sip of his hot chocolate, the warmth flooding his body as he sipped from the sweet drink. She'll probably be hovering over you for a while, and I'd be shocked if dozens of different inventions didn't start piling up around you soon. Where was I going with this? The man laughed at himself. Right, I wanted to tell you, May's going to be driving herself into the ground even after this for a while. Try to rein her in when you can. Nothing extreme. Her mother and I make sure she eats and sleeps most of the time, but if it looks like she's heading in this direction again, please help her. Izuku nodded. The man didn't have to ask him. Izuku regarded the sleeping May with his deeply tired eyes. He could no longer treat his own life without meaning, because as strange as it was, someone had decided, of their own free will, that his life meant something to them. He put his hot chocolate on the ground and felt his neck muscles give up as he rested his head against her workbench once more and felt his eyes close as her father walked away. When Izuku woke up, they both had blankets draped over their forms and pillows supporting their heads. It was the best Izuku had slept in years, and he felt genuinely refreshed as he woke up. He cradled May's head as he shifted her aside. He stood and inspected the thing she had made, the baby born from her desire to protect him, her new, greatest invention. It was 2 very long lengths of a kind of wrap. Izuku recognized it as the kind used for wrapping fists to stop bruising and protect from fracturing wrist bones. Something that would have been very useful when he had been kidnapped. But anyone could buy hand wraps. May's were far more than that, and Izuku recognized the inspiration for them almost instantly. They were made of the same fabric as a Eraserhead's scarf, and if he trained, could probably be shot out the same way. They contained one more feature, one she helpfully labeled as memory form. When he tugged his hands in the right way, the wrappings would force themselves into a certain shape, specifically different weapons. She had already set up a staff, a sword, which was surprisingly sharp given the metallic nature of the material, and batons. Chimera was the name of his new weapon. He gripped the loose strands in his hands before they moved without his prompting, snaking his way up his arms, automatically wrapping itself around his hands. He let them, his trust in May overwhelming any natural self-preservation at the seemingly sentient movements of the wrapping. He flexed his hands, and the wrapping followed his commands, loosening or tightening based on the strength he put into his hands. He could also fully extend his fingers away from each other, meaning he would be able to grip things while still wielding the weapon. It was also already providing some nice relief to his still aching wrist. He bowed his head in the direction of his own hands. Another new partner. Eraserhead looked at Izuku, a dry smile reaching his lips from behind his bandages. It was somewhat hard to tell, but Izuku recognized that expression anywhere. You look like you got hit by a truck. Izuku sighed. I think there's some madman driving circles around my neighborhood. You should look both ways next time. Just teach me how to use this. Izuku brandished his hand wrappings. Eraserhead let out a low whistle looking at them. Should I be suing someone? You're ancient right. I think it's in the public domain by now. That's 95 years. And, you hurt your legs. They're healed now. Get running, smartass. Izuku stretched his back as he woke up. He made his way through his empty apartment, its walls covered in analysis notes, theories about the Metal Liberation Army, and blueprints of various things. He grabbed a mouth guard with a few electronic bits still sticking out. Taking things apart and putting them back together was cathartic, and Izuku had indulged in this habit often while still on house arrest. Shiketsu had been sending Chewy to deliver his work to his apartment, declaring that he would be resting for at least a month, even if the combined healing of Recovery Girl and Shiketsu's nurse had put him back into a functioning state. His nose wasn't even broken anymore. The school had also been intent on lessening the time he spent out of his apartment for his own safety, and the cabin fever was getting to him. He was barely a sane person as is. He didn't need to add more isolation on top of that. He fiddled with the equipment, tucking all the bits sticking out into the frame of the object, finishing the code, and adding any finishing touches. It was nice. He finished his work fairly quickly, and with it, he had his excuse to get out of his apartment. Izuku looked at Flashbang as the man held the handrail next to him. He would deny how comforting the man's presence was, especially when he saw the train again. He hadn't expected to have a reaction to it, but had felt his heartbeat start up without his consent, and could feel his breathing increase in pace. The older man had clasped a hand on his shoulder, and the physical touch was grounding. But he'd never admit that, and the man didn't ask him to. The hustle and bustle of the train was also comforting, filled to the brim with salarymen and door-to-door salesmen. He wasn't isolated. He wasn't alone. It was a long ride. Izuku was thankful to be off of it as he returned Flashbang's wave while he walked into 𝐬𝐬. He made his way easily through the massive halls of 𝐬𝐬 compared to the sleek dark interior of Shiketsu. He felt like covering his eyes from how bright the #1 school was. He took a detour from going straight to the support class and instead made his way to Class 1A. He had to deliver the mouth guard. He kicked on the door and spoke. Delivery for 𝐬𝐬, her updated support equipment. The door opened and he saw his teacher's bandaged form. He spoke dryly. Problem child. Old man. A silence passed between them. I thought the inventing was all that friend of yours. Izuku shrugged. I got bored. Shiketsu decided no trucks could make their way to my apartment, so I should just stay there. Illogical. As a hero you'll need to learn constant vigilance anyway. Yeah. Could you just let me deliver the mouth guard, old man? Respect your elders. The man grumbled but moved aside as he walked his way into the dumbstruck class. He didn't really know why they were all looking at him like he had grown a second head, but he ignored them and placed the equipment on 𝐬𝐬's desk, alongside a note. That's a guide to the code. Bite into it for a moment or a second to change your message. He dropped 4 Bluetooth headphones he had scavenged with 𝐚𝐻. These'll automatically translate it, so give them to anyone you're working with. The girl started waving her arms dramatically, the shock of the situation wearing off. Wait. He raised an eyebrow. What? Is something wrong with the equipment? No, it's perfect. But how on earth do you know Eraserhead Sensei? The old man. We meet on Tuesdays to fulfill his deprived need to force children to run. The man's grumbling voice came from his podium. You were the one who requested more cardio. More. Keyword there, more. Not only more. Stop breaking your hands and arms in truck accidents and maybe you can do something with them. They're already healed. For this week. Izuku rolled his eyes, before waving his hand in the direction of the class. All right, I've killed too much time already. 𝐚𝐻's going to get antsy. He closed the door behind him and headed to the support department. The class exploded into noise as soon as the boy left. The racer shut them down with a glare, before he let out a sigh. 3 questions, total. Mina's hand was in the air almost before he finished talking. She spoke without his prompting. How do you know the 𝐬𝐻? He narrowed his eyes. The what? Quirkless Savage. 𝐬𝐻. That's an awful name. I met him a few weeks before the 𝐬𝐬 exams. He has potential, so I teach him. Sue raised her hand and he nodded in her direction. Why doesn't he go here then? Ribbit. He made the logical decision that if he were here, a theoretically quirkless teacher with the same freedom to expel people as I have would eliminate him immediately. He decided instead to go to Shiketsu since they adhere to a rigid system which dictates expulsion. There were mutters of understanding at that. Kaminari raised his hand next, and Aizawa nodded to him. Why's that guy running errands for the support department? I imagine you've all seen the footage of his fight. Though there were some exceptions, the class as a whole nodded. The equipment on his arm was made by a member of our support department, Mei Hatsume, the woman who he declares his only friend. A crackle came from Bakugo. Everyone turned to look at him, but he was staring out the window. Kirishima spoke, the silently elected student representative for all things Bakugo related. Bakugo, why do you always get crackly after the 𝐬𝐻 is brought up? The boy growled. First of all, 𝐬𝐻 is the dumbest fucking name I've ever heard. It sounds like a fucking species of duck. Second, me and that nerd's history is none of your ducking business. He paused for a second. Fucking, none of your fucking business. Kirishima continued speaking. Oh man, so there is history. Fuck off. Aizawa shut them all down with another glare from his bandaged form. You shouldn't worry about others so much. The sports festival is approaching. 𝐬𝐡𝐚𝐭𝐈💂 let out a deep sigh as he sat in his office, a steady stream of steam warming up one side of his face from the coffee in his hands. On his small desk, a series of several different disconnected threads were strewn around, as if physically burying himself in the evidence would somehow make it suddenly make sense. He took a deep sip of coffee the same way one might take a drag from a cigarette. The strange case of one Izuku Midoriya. The kid was odd enough as it was, fighting as hard as he was for a position that would be nothing but endless scorn thrown on him. Kakashi couldn't see the appeal. In his mind, everyone had something they were suited towards. His quirk and his cousins both allowed them to find the truth better than anyone else, so they became police officers and detectives respectively. The kid didn't have a quirk. Not to say he had no talents, but then attempting to go into a career which was almost entirely quirk-based was like if a caveman decided to study quantum physics. It's an admirable goal, and one you can work hard at, but fundamentally lack the ability to complete. Well, not that anyone was asking Tsukuchi, and in his mind it was more of a personal thing. Kidnapping and attempted murder of a minor, however. Those were not personal opinions, those were crimes, ones he was beginning to tangle himself up in, like a knot that only tightens the more you pull. Izuku Midoriya was able to provide 2 pictures and an SD card from a camera which had 3 total suspects, each with confirmed and testified quirks that the boy was able to give an immense amount of detail on. He had combed through the quirk registry looking specifically for any quirks with water or electricity, which were numerous but manageable. He found 2 hits which matched the individuals. Akira Tobashi, born to negligent parents then put up for adoption. His quirk gave him nozzles on his fingers that could spit out water. Necro Utsumaki, born to a single mom before being put up for adoption. His quirk allowed him to emit and control electricity from his palms. Both were adopted on the same day 2 years apart. Neither has been seen since, and the credentials used for adoption, alongside the apartment listed and inspected by Social Security workers, all came up as deleted or non-existent. Even trudging up and interviewing the Social Security workers themselves brought up no leads. They honestly had no memory whatsoever of working with the boys, despite the fact that they had apparently done the proper check-ins on a monthly then yearly basis. Tsukuchi noted potential memory quirk usage, but conceded that it was conjecture. At a certain point, the boys stopped being tracked on the register, lost and no longer being updated, though whether this was also quirk-related or due to the abysmal care of the Japanese adoption system, who's to say? The man the boy had referred to as the preacher was Satoru Iwata, a well-documented and tracked extremist speaker with ties to quirkless and lesser quirked, as people with weak quirks were often referred to hate groups. The man's rhetoric had invited past investigation, but it was officially concluded that he was all bark and no bite. Where did this man suddenly get the confidence to so blatantly attempt murder of all things? The gospel the man was preaching was about an organization he called the Meta Liberation Army, a reference to the old revolutionaries. The man was clearly deranged, but begged the question of if this organization was even real at all. The group of fighters whom Izuku fought in the hallway were officially listed as security guards, and while the quantity of them was incredibly suspicious, there was no proof of foul play. A few of the guards whose homes were searched revealed they owned copies of the Meta Liberation War. While suspicious, again, not grounds to arrest someone. In reality, the vast majority of those guys were going to walk free, probably with a massive red mark on their resume for improper quirk usage and a large fine for assaulting a minor, even if it did technically fall under their job description. Kakashi rolled back in his chair, looking straight up as he took another long sip. He cracked his neck muscles before sighing once more. If he couldn't track the people, he'd have to track the places. It was time to do some digging on the place it all went down. Ritousu listened to the music playing in his headphones as he leaned against a wall in a dimly lit room, his hands deep in the varsity-style jacket he had on. The various shadowy figures in the room had been talking for a while. Their leader had already basically destroyed the desk by slamming his hands into it while stressed out, and everyone was trying not to have a repeat. Rito's mother's form bubbled with rage. He shifted away from her as the heat and steam from her boiling body made it hard to stay near. Despite her emotions being obvious, she kept a cool figure as she spoke. I believe priority number 1 should be figuring out how the tapes were leaked. Someone who had access to the cameras leaked them. He really wanted to point out the pun potential of someone made of water using the word leaked, but figured now wasn't the time. He also stayed cool about the fact the conversation had now shifted to him, the one who leaked the video. A blue-skinned reporter huffed as she spoke. Whoever it was covered their tracks well. Frankly, I haven't the slightest idea how they slipped the cameras themselves. They'd need to have planned this well in advance before using a truly minimal window of time to sneak into the security office, grab the tape, then sneak out. Not to mention tracking down the actual poster is impossible considering it was posted to one of those crappy anonymous sites before being picked up and spread around. This was premeditated and intelligently designed. Man, she made him sound like some kind of mastermind. In reality, after giving the kid the win in the fight so he had a chance to survive, Rito woke up as the kid was still fighting. People were a little busy focusing on the tornado of flesh and metal fighting for his life to notice Rito crawling away. He stumbled, still somewhat rocked, into the open door of the security room, then got the brilliant idea to release the tape in what could only be called a concussed haze. He didn't even actually steal the tape. He recorded it manually with his phone, then sent it to a random forum he was a part of, hoping it would gain traction. He then walked back out, saw some hero standing over the now fully unconscious kid, and ducked back into the security room. He carved a small hole in the wall with pressurized water, then shimmied his way out. A hop, skip, and a few well-calculated falls later, and he was home free. Well, still concussed. But hey, being an executive of Detonet brought in the big bucks, so his mom got him the best care money could buy. Of course, he had also spent the last few weeks on intensive quirk training to make up for struggling against a quirkless opponent. But hey, carrot and stick right. The board started fighting again as Rito's mind wandered off. Izuku Midoriya. Rito really wanted to believe Midoriya could succeed. The way he saw things, Japan had two prospective futures. The government remains in control, and villainous quirks are discriminated against. Or, the MLA takes over, and weak quirks are discriminated against. Given a base understanding of history, discrimination will happen no matter what. The only time humans were truly egalitarian was when we last hunted and gathered for food. For Rito Isu, there was no right side, no moral high ground. Everyone was out for themselves. And the organizations and people that advocated for those moral high grounds were either corrupt or inefficient. But Izuku, hell, it didn't matter if Izuku was an awful guy. All that mattered was his lack of quirk. Rito felt his heartbeat pick up as he thought about the boy. A quirkless child raising above everything to become a hero. Someone who was equal in the way that no matter which of the sides of Japan's warring political sphere won, he'd be looked down on. There was no reality in which Izuku's victory would change just about anything. The boy would likely become a hero, then die soon after. But that first part was all that mattered. If just for a second, someone could rise above everything, ascend out of the murky and muddy waters of the real world and insert their own, then that would be the moment Rito Isu was complete. The conversation with the board members had gone back around to how to dispatch Izuku. Rito took out his headphones and walked forward, right behind his now cooled down mother. He typed into his device, and the mechanical voice that he knew to be the closest to his own spoke. "I can take care of him." It would be unbecoming for any of the esteemed higher management members to step down to fight a being so far below them. The room was silent as his mechanical voice stopped. A figure in a fluffy hood similar to the ones used by the Arctic natives of the past spoke up. "While I don't disagree that it's below us, what makes you worthy of a second try? With all due respect, I achieved the mission I was entrusted with. The target was delivered and captured. Had the issued command not been an alive capture, I would have simply let him bleed out and we wouldn't be having this talk." There was silence once more. The leader of the movement, Ritostro himself, cleared his throat, bringing attention to him. "Young Isu, this is a matter of great importance. Izuku Midoriya must die, no matter what it takes. Call upon all resources, utilize all abilities we have. Wear him down and shoot him like the dog he is. I shall entrust this responsibility unto you." Rito nodded despite having his own plan in mind. "Yes, sir." Izuku made his way into his school for the first time in a few weeks now. He was finally not feeling sore in his. Everywhere, really. He had missed the cool dark halls of Shiketsu, even if he could no longer walk around without a flock of people staring at him, muttering, avoiding. Pretty much the only people who would talk to him were the staff and his classmates. But that wasn't really a problem. Inasa was loud enough to make up for any number of other friends. Chewy was reliable almost to a fault, and 𝐀𝐦 was so unendingly positive it was hard to feel down. Seiji and Ally had joined the group that ignored him. It hurt a little, even if they were never close. He still knew them by name. At the very least, after his kidnapping, no one laughed at him anymore. The glances his way were weary, not mocking. It might be fear rather than respect, but it was probably the closest he'd ever get. It didn't help that his face was marked permanently with a symbol of what happened to him. The claw marks remained present and recent. After a year or two, they'd fade into thin lines, but as they were, red marks made angry stripes down his face. Izuku spun a pencil in his hands for the last period of the day, applied physics. He had been keeping up just through parsing the homework and studying the content whilst trapped in either his apartment or hospital bed. The content wasn't that hard for him to begin with anyways. Crackle was the one who taught this class. Izuku wasn't familiar with her as a hero, but even with his missing days he was now intimately familiar with her love of bad puns. When calculating gravitational force, make sure you understand the gravity of the situation. Understanding vectors will make you the victor. Thermodynamics is the most dynamic field of study. It was mentally draining in a way no other class had managed. Luckily, today wasn't about physics. "Yellow class, what's crackling? Today I'm just here to talk to you about the upcoming sports festival. Make sure to dust off your costumes so you're all sporting your best looks. The class didn't even groan anymore, too used to the onslaught. Now, I know you all may have some misconceptions thanks to UA's whole thing, but I can assure you it's in no way similar. You will be allowed quirk usage, and a specific group of invited heroes, mostly underground, will be attending. But that's where the similarities end. She moved to hand out pamphlets to the class, each taking one as she spoke. For one, the hero course and other classes have isolated events, so you guys won't be competing with non-hero course students. No risk of failing out during it either. Izuku looked over the pamphlet. It was lines and lines of coded text. Helpful. As for what you're going to be doing, it's all helpfully written down on the pamphlets. Try not to flip out decoding them. Otherwise, all I've got to say is we recommend you watch UA's festival, as it takes place before ours. Alrighty, go home and rest up, people. Oh, Midoriya, stay for a second please. The rest of the class filled out, as Izuku remained seated. After everyone left, she spoke. If you aren't feeling 100, just say the words and you won't have to compete. I'm going to compete if I have to crawl there. Crackle just laughed at him, figured you'd say that. Well, that's all from me, good luck.